What you got about to turn blue?
What you're seeing here is a mirage.
What's going on, everyone? It is Jaren from Jarenism, back with a live video for you. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. Shout out first to all my patrons for making this channel possible. I do appreciate it so much. You guys are awesome. I've decided to call this video Quotes That Tell Us We've All Been Lied To. So, pretty simple little title. I was in the middle of making slides for each and every quote and sourcing each quote, and eventually I just realized it was simply taking too long. And it would be easier just to read all the quotes that I have gathered straight from OneNote, and then maybe make some short comments on those quotes as I read them. So that will be what this live stream is all about. It won't be pretty or attractive like my normal videos, because basically I'm just using a window capture, the OneNote application, and then reading from there. So no normally gorgeous text slides as I sometimes make, so my apologies for that. Also, just to address some comments on a recent video that I did where I included several quotes, the criticism was that in the middle of the quote, I would begin making comments and then continue to quote as if this, left the listener confused as to which words I was actually quoting and which words were mine. And so I went back to watch the video and, wow. My apologies for sure, because they were exactly right. Sure, I knew which words were mine and which were part of the quote, but when I listened back and I kind of pretended like I was hearing the quotes for the first time, they were 100% correct with that criticism. So thank you for those who pointed that out, because they couldn't have been more correct. Really quick, let me show you an example of what I'm talking about, and this way you know what I will and will not be doing throughout this video. So on the screen you'll see a quote. It's an actual real quote that I, like one I'd read today. And it's like the ones I've read in my recent videos. But let's pretend like I was reading this quote, and I'll kind of read it like what everybody said I was doing that was wrong, and they're correct, because I said, quote, "I've already known for a long time that we do not have proof for the system of Copernicus." Oops, 1 second. Alright, super chats, great. I'll be right back with those. Thank you guys so much for that. So anyway, if I was reading this quote, I would say, quote, "I've already known for a long time that we do not yet have proof for the system of Copernicus," which at the time was one of a 3 million mile distant sun, and so much more fantasy nonsense that it's practically a joke. "But I shall not take the risk of being the first one attacking it." Alexander von Humboldt. So you can see what I did there? Yeah, bad Jared. And so my critics could not have been more correct in this regard. I did it on 10 different occasions. So I totally stand corrected. I apologize, and I promise not to do that again. As to everyone but me, I guess that can be quite confusing, and I now realize that. So throughout this video, I will just simply read the quote in full without commentary until I end the quote. So this quote and commentary will now be easily separated. For example, we can have the quote from Alexander von Humboldt. Quote, "I have already known for a long time that we do not yet have proof for a system of Copernicus, but I shall not take the risk of being the first one to attack it." End quote. Alexander von Humboldt. Now, at the time of Copernicus, he had a 3 million mile distant sun and so much more fantasy nonsense, it feels like some sort of joke, etc., or something similar. So I'm just making an example case here. So anyway, thank you for that feedback. I stand corrected. I shall be severely punished for my transgressions. So now you know what to expect and how you'll know when I'm reading a quote and when I'm commenting on what. I'll try and keep my comments limited, but if anybody knows me, they know that I can't really say how successful I'll be at doing so. So you'll just have to bear with me. I'll also be creating a page on my website which will have all of these quotes in a single post under this video when it finally posts to my jarenism.com website. Alright, so let's begin with a question, and that question is, what is the point of this video? So, the point is that I think there are so many quotes, and so many, that tell us that we've all been lied to. Now, despite the current debate over the shape of the Earth, the first step to waking someone up is showing them that we've all been lied to. So if I'm able to show that all of the real science and many of the greatest minds of all time, quote unquote, agree that all tests show that the Earth is fixed, well, would you then realize that there's a problem? I hope so. I just want to show people what exactly led me to the understanding that for me is so clear, that the current scientific establishment has a certain worldview, and that worldview says that we cannot be in a central position in the universe, and the quotes will prove just that. That observationally, they cannot say that we are not the center, that they make their choices on philosophical grounds, and and some of them say based on quote-unquote modesty. It's not science. That is known as a worldview, and it steers their science and their observations in a direction, and people deserve to know that. It is the absolute definition of pseudoscience. It's being taught as actual science, and it's absolutely far from it. So, because in my opinion, it should show you what is going on and what we're dealing with, but really it's up to you. You've got to decide what to believe. So, in my opinion, the entirety of astronomy and cosmology is actually built upon this mediocrity assumption, this worldview, that Earth cannot be central, it cannot be important, we must be no different than the lights in the sky. It's full of presuppositions, assumptions, begging the question, and in actuality, it's all just pseudoscience. But my hope is simple here. By the end of this video, you can realize that we are not taught everything, but we're just taught a one-sided, convoluted, concocted model that's built on assumptions and philosophical beliefs, and that any and all observations that show otherwise get buried or explained away using, of course, mathematics, metaphysical theories that allow them to keep this worldview and to maintain their status as the heliocentric, quote-unquote, geniuses that they are. And the choice is yours, to see them that way or to see them as I do, as priests of a religion who have devised clever explanations and basically mathematical formulas to hide the truth from you, me, and the entire world. So just imagine for a second, maybe close your eyes if you want to get in touch with your inner self, and think for a second, if you realized today that the Earth was in fact still, that it was in fact fixed and of prime importance, if it was the apple of God's eye per se, would that change your worldview? Well, it absolutely did mine. It changed my entire life and my world profoundly. So my hope is that you hear these quotes and decide for yourself if you'd like to continue the belief centered around these forced explanations of these men to explain these anomalies, or if by chance, maybe you now realize, like I do, what's actually going on. Maybe you open your mind for possibly the first time to what is a myriad of other possibilities and various conceptions and ideas that better explain the world that we live in. So the choice will truly become your own, and you aren't cornered into a belief system that is taught to children before they can even understand or possibly question the worldview that is about to become part of their belief system. I think nothing is important as where you live, right? If the Earth is central and of the utmost importance, then I believe all humans deserve to know that and to operate their lives within that enormously important understanding. So let's get to the quotes. There are many more than I've assembled here today, so many more. I just tried to maybe touch a little bit of everything and try to corral them, but I'm only pointing to quotes about this particular worldview and subject, so I won't be reading quotes today about the Earth being flat. You won't hear any quotes like that. You won't hear any evolution quotes. You won't hear quotes like the age of dinosaurs or those kind of things. No, today is just going to be about the Earth. We're going to be looking at the Earth, its location in the cosmos, its centrality, its fixed position, and the tests and opinions regarding relativity and why it is that all tests, at least all tests that I've been able to find, prove that the Earth does not move. So, in the end, when you hear the quotes and contrast them with what you were taught and what's being taught to our children and your grandchildren, perhaps then maybe you will see the issue and understand why so many of us are absolutely against what's going on and what's being taught. So the truth is that it is not science, it's pseudoscience, it's not reality, it's a mathematical conception, and it's not fact, but simply it's theory. And if, it's not the correct view of the world, but rather it's like a worldview pushed onto everyone for public and also social indoctrination, as we've seen of recent. So I've got my OneNote opened here where I keep all my notes, and we can start to go through some of them. And I'm sure that there are many, many more, like I said. So if I miss some, or maybe you find a quote that I have missourced or something's wrong with it, please leave a quote in the comment or leave a comment saying that I did so. Or if you have any other quotes that maybe I didn't include that you want other people to see, you can leave those as a comment as well. And this way more people can see it. My quotes are kind of arranged in a way that makes it easy for me to kind of tell a story. So I'm going to get to those in a second. But before I start, I want to cover one thing that seems to me that all heliocentric religious zealots want to try and tell me when I say that the Earth does not move and that there's no tests that prove it. What do they always say? They say Foucault's pendulum. Well, you should notice that all of these quotes by Einstein and many others, not all the quotes, some are by Copernicus before Foucault, but I'm talking about all the quotes that I read that are after Foucault. Why would it be that Einstein would say that there's no experiment that can prove the Earth moves if he knew about the Foucault's pendulum, which he absolutely did? He knew about the Foucault's pendulum. So that's one thing I think people miss, or that they don't really quite understand about Foucault's pendulum. And if you don't know about it, we'll talk about it real quick, just because it is the one answer that I get, where, this Foucault's pendulum proves that the Earth spins. Okay, let's talk about it real quick. So we have these pendulums everywhere, right? And these pendulums are basically attached to this presupposed spherical spinning Earth, which supposedly rotates once every 24 hours. But the Earth also goes around the Sun once yearly, and the Sun goes around the galaxy, and the galaxy goes around the universe at 2.2 million miles per hour. And these are all local motions. So somehow the Foucault pendulum ignores all the local motions but one. It only recognizes the spin of the Earth. Well, the Foucault pendulum miraculously stays lined up with the rest of the universe. And some try and say that it's inertia, but what exactly is inertia? Nobody even knows. I'll get back to that real quick, but I do want to show you, if I can get this up here, 1 second. I do want to show you a live stream of a Foucault pendulum. Let's go over there. So this is a live stream of the Foucault pendulum. I don't know where it's at, but where is this at? Ludwig University something, Geophysics, Department of Earth Environmental Sciences.
Let's go!
Web address, geophysic auction, copies, descriptions, so nobody wants to see this. But here you can see, and they've got these 24-hour snapshots. You can see that the pendulum actually moves around something. But here's the thing that people don't really recognize. Remember, how often does the Earth spin? It spins once a day, right? But no, you've got to do all these mathematical equations again. The definition of pseudoscience. Bring in these mathematical equations so that you can actually be correct, because if you look here, the direction of the plane of oscillation of a pendulum with respect to the Earth rotates with an angular speed proportional to the sine of its latitude. Thus, one at 45 degrees rotates every 1.4 days, and one at 30 degrees, which is about where I'm at, thereabouts, every 2 days. So it takes 2 days to rotate all the way around, but the Earth takes 1 day. You can read a little bit further here. It says, so many people have found that the sign factor difficult to understand, which prompted Foucault to conceive the gyroscope in 1852. The gyroscope's spinning rotor tracks. Not bring you over. I did. Continue on what I was reading. We're here. A Foucault pendulum is tricky to set up because imprecise construction can cause additional veering, which masks the terrestrial effect. Air resistance damps the oscillation. So Foucault pendulums in museums usually incorporate an electromagnetic or other drive to keep the bob swinging. This is an absolute lie, because it says usually. So what, is there a museum somewhere where the Foucault pendulum swings by itself forever? No, sorry. You need an electromagnetic drive to keep the bob swinging. You have to have a magnet underneath it to keep it going. That's how things work. You can't just spin a pendulum and it go forever. That's against the laws of motion. So anyway, this is just, I wanted to show you this nonsense here, and we'll talk further about it. But like I said, a lot of people will tell you that it's inertia that causes this to happen, but nobody even knows what inertia is. All explanations about inertia involve circular reasoning. Usually it'll sound something like this. The body keeps doing what it's doing because it has inertia. Okay, so what is inertia? Well, inertia is the tendency of a body to keep moving. Okay, that's great. But why does it keep doing what it's doing? Well, because it has inertia. What? But what is inertia? Well, it's the tendency of a body to keep doing whatever it's doing. Okay, but why does it keep doing whatever it's doing? And so on and so forth. It's just circular reasoning. You'll never get an answer. So perhaps inertia is a universal property. That's possible. And if so, then the ether or the firmament could be the very source causing the Foucault pendulum and the Coriolis effect. And this is why people like Einstein and others can't use Foucault's pendulum as proof that the Earth spins. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying here. You might hear heliocentrists tell us that the entire atmosphere and everything in it, we're talking about birds, butterflies, clouds, balloons, planes, helicopters, whatever you want to say, are all magically velcroed somehow to the Earth, spinning perfectly in sync with its axial rotation, and actually reduces its speed also. The atmosphere reduces its speed as you head towards the pole, so it's going 1,040 miles per hour at the pole, and as you walk north, it'll eventually be 0 miles per hour. That's what, of course, it tells. But where does this atmosphere even stop spinning? What altitude? Nobody knows. If we could get up in a balloon, let's say we all get in a balloon, and we travel upwards to the upper limits of the atmosphere, what would happen? It's utter nonsense to think that the atmosphere, the air, is somehow attached and totally synchronized to perfection from 1,040 miles per hour to 0, and yet somehow we have clouds, we have winds, they all blow in every direction. This is a problem, folks. This is pseudoscience by its very definition. It's never shown, never detected, never proven, or scientifically shown in any way. Just absurdities that are required to save the heliocentric model. Like you can add a little theory here and some math there, and you can continue to have people believe that your little worldviews are fact. And, I certainly don't agree with that at all. Basically, for me, heliocentricity is not even logically plausible, let alone irrefutable. It's a theory that we are taught is based on scientific data, but it's actually purely based on a series of assumptions that were built up over the last few hundred years. For example, many of the assertions regarding these astronomical distances between lights in the sky are completely invented, and they're put into calculations on the a priori assumption that the Earth must be revolving around the Sun, while at the same time, these assumed distances have another function where they're used as some sort of, petitio principii device to indicate that the Sun must be at the center because of that distance. Go figure. Here's an example of how it's done. We're told that the Sun is too big to revolve around the Earth. But wait a minute. Isn't the Sun's size determined in the first place by assuming how big it must have been in order for us to have a heliocentric model? Of course it is. Go figure. Other assumptions might include the alleged tilt of the Earth. The tilt of the Earth's axis of 23.5 degrees, an absolute desperately needed heliocentric variable that has no basis in the real world, where the Sun simply orbits from the Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn annually. But of these tropical latitude lines, they're not tilted. They're at an angle of 0 degrees. Both circles are parallel to the equator. In fact, the very word tropic itself comes from the Greek term tropos, which means to turn, referring to the fact that the Sun turns back at these lines and they aren't tilted in any way at all. Or the Earth supposedly darting around the Sun at various speeds. It orbits, right, at a faster speed at the northern winter and a slower speed at the northern summer. Then back faster again, back and forth. But somehow all of this alleged speed change remains unnoticeable. Of course, they like to say, well, we don't feel constant motion or speed, and yet the Earth we're on is changing speeds constantly. Basically at every single second. Sorry, I'm going to have to get a drink here already. Where was I? So, not to mention the fact that the moon is also being dragged around at exactly those same speed levels. It's just, how could it be in full, complete synchronization with the wobbly Earth, despite being 250,000 miles away? It's all such nonsense. So, what do I have on the screen? Get over here to OneNote. First, I did want to say thank you to my super chats. Somebody left before we got started. Leaf Eaters, your work is great. I've been watching your videos since you began. I think you should repost some of your older videos for some of the newcomers. Very entertaining. You are an inspiration. Thank you very much. Rhino, just a regular guy who owns 900 who wants to help shoot across the bay. Yes, I got you. That's going to come up fairly soon. I do have one observation I'm going to make in the canal. As soon as I get my camera before I take it to Monterey Bay to do that observation. So Rhino, I will let you know. Thank you very much for that super chat. I appreciate it. And if anybody else wants to send a super chat, I will let those in due time. But like I said, we're going to move over here to OneNote. Let's see. Hopefully you can see my OneNote. Alright. Why do I not see the text? 1 second. This could prove to be catastrophic. What is going on? Oh, there we go. Okay, I got it. Sorry. I got it on the blank page. That's probably why you couldn't see it. So, okay, so we're just going to go through some of these quotes. I've kind of got them sectioned off. Please forgive me if I make any pronunciation errors. Don't say somebody's name right. You're wrong. Probably start out with something simple. This is theoretical physicist Cucks telling us about cosmology. Hear this? We'll be able to go ahead and try it.
Usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say something's wrong with the theory. We're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zero factor. This is the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science.
Okay, so thank you, Michikaku, and hopefully you heard that. I think it might have been a little on the quiet side, but yeah, he basically tells you right there that they're off by a factor of 10 to the 120th power in regards, and he says it's the largest mismatch in the history of science. Hopefully people get the importance of that quote and understand what we're dealing with, and then you can decide if these are really the people that you want telling you where you live when they just admitted to be off by the largest factor in the history of science when you're looking at experiments versus theory. That's because the experiments do not show at all what these theories are that they've been telling us about the universe forever. And I described it last night, but I thought I just mentioned it again real quick before we get to some of the other ones, that to me science is like a tightrope walker. Because the goal when you're a tightrope walker is to never look at your feet, because as soon as you do, you realize how high up you are, you realize you're in midair, and then you may fall a long way down. But as long as you look straight forward, if you're walking a tightrope, you usually can walk safely across. And the reason for that is because you don't want to look down. You need to just keep looking forward, keep plugging ahead, and that's what science is doing. Science does not want to look at its foundation. They don't want to look at, and we call it the body of science if you want. I'm talking about the people involved in it. They certainly don't want to look down. They do not want to explore their foundations, because if they did and they found a crack, that could collapse the entire thing. So they don't want to look down. They're just like a tightrope walker. But let's get on to the quotes, okay? So I started out with some that I'm just calling prime importance. So by the way, this video might be long. I've got over 100 quotes to read. Some of them are quite long. So either bear with me, or if you need to watch this in segments, you can do that. My goal is to hit every one of these quotes today, and that's what we'll be doing. Then we'll read some super chats, and then we'll go to bed. So let's go to the first quote I thought was interesting here. Nietzsche had to say, quote, "Where has God gone?" He cried, "I shall tell you, we have killed him. You and I, we are his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whether it is moving now, whether we are moving now, away from all suns? Are we not perpetually falling? Backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? God's too decomposed. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, console ourselves?" End quote. Let's go on to the next quote. Just some little topic quotes here. Like I said, prime importance quotes. This is Leo Tolstoy. Quote, "I know that most men, including those at ease with problems of the greatest complexity, can seldom accept even the simplest and most obvious truth, if it be such as would oblige them to admit their falsity of the conclusions which they have delighted in explaining to their colleagues, which they have proudly taught to others, and which they have woven thread by thread into the fabric of their lives." End quote. So, comment on this quote here is just simply exactly what I say about people like Neil deGrasse and Bill Nye. These men have the ease, the greatest of ease at explaining the great complexity of the universe. They make it sound so simple, so easy. Oh, we figured it all out. But they can seldom accept even the slightest, most obvious truth. If it would be one, it would oblige them to admit the falsity of their conclusions, which they have delighted in. They explain it to their colleagues, and they've taught it to others. They go to auditoriums and speak about it, and they have, had it woven thread by thread in the fabric of their lives. So, again, hopefully you understand why that quote is there. Let's get into a little more detailed ones. We've got Fred Boyle here, who said, the history of science shows that each generation finds the universe to be stranger than the preceding generation ever conceived it to be. Next, we have Phil Platt. Many people have heard of him, right? The bad astronomer. What did he have to say? Well, you might take note here. He said, I have two things to say that might surprise you. First, geocentrism is a valid frame of reference. And second, heliocentrism is not any more or less correct. Stop and think, ladies and gentlemen. Think to yourself. If one cannot be more correct than the other, why are you laughed at if you say the earth stands still? Why is it being taught to children every single day in this world that the earth absolutely goes around the sun? Let's continue reading, and by the end of this, you're going to be baffled with the amount of scientists that say the exact same thing. It's the exact same frame. It's just a different frame of reference. There is no better model than the other, and yet one is being taught as absolute, complete, and total fact. Why? Because the other one might invoke the Creator, might explain creation, might place importance on the earth. Let's continue. We've got George Ellis, and man, have I read this quote a million times. Let's read it again. Quote, people need to be aware that there is a range of models that can explain the observations. For instance, I can construct you a spherically symmetrical universe with Earth at its center, and you cannot disprove it based on your observations. You can only exclude it on philosophical grounds. In my view, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. What I want to bring into the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that. End quote. George Ellis, a premier physicist in the world. And let's just comment on this real quick so you can go back and understand what he's saying here. This was a huge quote to me. People who have listened to me know that I read this every other show I do, because I was taught in school, science is all about truth. So, science doesn't lie. Science just is an unbiased observer. It's observations. But yet we see George Ellis tell us that he wants to bring out into the open that the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology, which is science, this is a branch of science, tries to hide that. So there's a branch of science out there trying to hide something from people? What do you mean? How could that be possible? Why is science trying to hide anything from me? Well, he's explaining exactly what he's telling you. They are choosing which model based on philosophical criteria. And he says, now, to him, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, great, that's his opinion. I don't care what he thinks, whether or not there's something wrong with that. But he tells people, what I want to bring out in the open is the fact that we're using this and choosing our models, and that we're trying to hide that. I mean, you're going to learn by the end of this video the exact reason why. And the reason why is these guys cannot stand, and I don't want to say these guys because George Ellis is different. George Ellis is somebody who does try and place the Earth back at the center because, well, all observations show that it is. Yeah, pretty brilliant, right? I mean, that's what an unbiased science observer would say when all the tests prove that the Earth is fixed and that things are moving away from us, and we're the center of the universe, and that's what it is. Except for you have a worldview that says, no, we cannot be the center. I hate that idea. I can't stand it. It goes against everything I am. I don't want to be important. I don't want to have a God. I don't want to be part of creation. And then all of a sudden, you will have cosmology trying to hide the fact that there is no difference between the two models. Okay, let's continue. Another George Ellis quote. Quote, this assumption is made because it is believed to be unreasonable that we should be near the center of the universe. End quote. Okay, comment on that. Again, we just talked about this. It's the assumption. Okay, so remember we're talking about science. Why are we making assumptions? The assumption is made because it is believed to be unreasonable that we should be near the center. Who cares what you believe should be unreasonable? No, they just choose that because you're afraid of the fact that we can be the center. They would rather get that to be true, and they will use any other concoction or formula or hypothesis they can, as long as it means that the Earth is not the center. Let's continue. And we've got Arthur S. Otis in his book, quote, in the effort to explain the Michelson-Morley experiment, the thought was advanced that the Earth might be stationary. Such an idea was not considered seriously. since it would mean in effect that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe with all other heavenly bodies paying homage by revolving around it. Again, this is why I loaded the beginning of this these quotes with these, just so you can see exactly what I'm trying to point out here, that these guys said not such an idea was not considered seriously. Why? If all the observations, if you're a scientist, and the tests and experiments and observations tell you that you're the center of the universe, it is not okay to say, well, we're not going to consider that seriously because we don't want to be the center. Ridiculous. Let's continue.
How do you say no to sin? To reject the temptation that you face each day? We've been learning that it's the grace of God that teaches us to say no to worldly passions, and especially to sexual temptation. One of my favorite passages about God's grace comes from
we got a Stephen Hawking quote coming up next. Quote, "The universe might look the same in every direction as seen from any other galaxy too. This, as we have seen, was Friedman's second assumption. We have no scientific evidence for or against this assumption. We believe it only on the grounds of modesty." End quote. Stephen Hawking. Hopefully you understand what's going on here again. Stephen Hawking explains it on the grounds of modesty. But if you're choosing your worldview, then that is the opposite of modesty. You're choosing what you like, not what science is telling you, not what experiments are showing you, not what observations are showing you. You're choosing instead, well, we change what we see based on the fact that we want to be modest. That's not being modest. That's the opposite. That's being holy hell conceited like I've never seen before. That you are able to change science? You are able to change observations and experiments? Crazy. Let's continue. Edwin Hubble. I've read this many times too. Let's read it full. Quote, "Such a condition would imply that we occupy a unique position in the universe, analogous in a sense to the ancient conception of a central Earth. This hypothesis cannot be disproved, but it is unwelcome and would only be accepted as a last resort in order to save the phenomenon. Therefore, we disregard this possibility. The unwelcome position of a favored location must be avoided at all costs. Such a favored position is intolerable. Therefore, in order to restore homogeneity and to escape the horror of a unique position, must be compensated by spatial curvature. There seems to be no other escape." Now remember, Edwin Hubble, the one who coined the phrase the Big Bang, the one who told everybody, oh, all these galaxies are moving away from us, which certainly places you in the center of the universe. How else could everything be moving away from you? Well, what did he come up with? He said, well, wait, what if the universe and the planet and everything that we know is on a balloon? And as you blow up the balloon, technically, everything on that balloon gets further away from each other. Picture a balloon, put a bunch of dots on it, and start to blow it up. Now pay no attention to who's actually blowing up the balloon of space, because that's what they call the expanding universe, and people might understand where that came from. This is why the universe has to be expanding, is simply because otherwise we're at the center of the universe. They don't want that. It's like, no. We're in a balloon, we're on a balloon, it's being blown up, we're all moving away from each other, and everyone, no matter where you're at in the universe, would all see the same thing, everything moving away from you. Again, never been proven, never been shown. It's pseudoscience. Hopefully you understand that. That's Edwin Hubble in his book from 1937. But again, look at how many, this quote is just so full of nonsense. Remember, this is the scientist who's making observations and saying, well, this condition would imply that we occupy a unique position. This hypothesis cannot be disproved. Okay? Remember what's being taught in school. Remember what you get laughed at for saying. If you dare say the sun goes around the earth, you will be laughed at. However, I'm about to read you 100 quotes and tell you we're in the center. Okay, so this hypothesis cannot be disproved. Okay, so why is it laughed at? Well, because it's unwelcome. Okay, good for you. What the difference does that make? Therefore, we disregard this possibility. What do you mean you're disregarding it? If something cannot be disproved and you're disregarding it? Holy smokes. Why are you disregarding it? Because it's the unwelcomed position of a favored location, and it must be avoided at all costs. Ladies and gentlemen, please listen to my words here and understand what's going on. You have to look at this and you have to understand that they're saying that the hypothesis cannot be disproved that we're the center, but it's unwelcome, and we're going to disregard it because it's an unwelcome position of a favored location, and it must be avoided at all costs. This is not science, ladies and gentlemen. This is the opposite of it. Such a favored position is intolerable. It's intolerable. What is that word when we're talking about science and observations and oh, well, I don't want to be in the center. It's intolerable. So let's make up whatever other nonsense. And what other nonsense do I mean? I mean the whole universe model that they've given you. This is what they've come up with. Because why? Because the alternative, saying we're the center, must be avoided at all costs. Such a favored position is intolerable. Therefore, in order to restore homogeneity and to escape the horror of a unique position, this is science. This is what scientists believe. We have to escape the horror of a unique position, so let's just make up a bunch of shit like we're on a balloon. Let's just do that. There seems to be no other escape. Wow. Let's go to Einstein from The Evolution of Physics, page 212. Quote, the struggle, so violent in the early days of science between the views of Ptolemy and Copernicus, would then be quite meaningless. Either coordinate system could be used with equal justification. The two sentences, the sun is at rest and the earth moves, or the sun moves and the earth at rest, would simply mean two different conventions concerning two different coordinate systems. So there's Einstein telling you that, well, whether the earth is the center or whether the sun's the center or whatever, it doesn't matter. You can pick Mars, you can pick whatever you want. You can pick any light in the sky and say, oh, now this is the center. Big deal. But what do they choose? They choose the sun. Why? Well, worship it. Let's go to the next one. Quote, there is no planetary observation by which we on Earth can prove that the Earth is moving in an orbit around the sun. End quote. Physicist Bernard Cohen. Again, what more do I need to say here, folks? No explanation needed here. There's no planetary observation which can prove that we move around the sun, but it's taught in schools as fact, and it's called science. People will run around and tell you it's scientifically proven. Good for them. How about Sir Isaac Newton? Quote, Plato is my friend, Aristotle is my friend, but my greatest friend is truth. Truth is ever to be found in simplicity, and not in the multiplicity and confusion of things. Oh boy, would that guy be turning in his grave today. They've simply destroyed anything simple and come up with the biggest nonsense theories and ad hoc explanations and pseudoscience that you've ever seen in your life. Let's go with Kepler here. Quote, I demonstrate by means of philosophy that the earth is round and is inhabited on all sides, that it is insignificantly small, and it is born through the stars. End quote. Johannes Kepler. I just thought it was funny to point out here that the words philosophy is in there. You demonstrate by means of philosophy? Way to be a scientist, guys. Way to go. It's the best science term I've ever heard. I demonstrate by means of I demonstrate by means of philosophy. Oh boy, this is classic. This is good stuff. We're barely, probably 10 quotes into the 100 that you got coming. Enjoy yourselves. Let's go with Edwin Hubble from the Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, 1937. Quote, if the redshifts are a Doppler shift, the observations as they stand lead to the anomaly of a closed universe, curiously small and dense, and it may be added, suspiciously young. So, very interesting. No real comment needed there. I mean, his redshifts that he said are the reason is because galaxies are moving away from us, but if instead they're a Doppler shift, well then all of a sudden we live in a closed universe. It's small, it's dense, and suspiciously young. What are we told today? Oh, the universe is 14-point-something billion years old, and this is fact. We can rewind the clock in the sky. Just rewind it. Rewind it back to a tenth of a 1,000th of a millionth of a second. And we can see how everything came into play. This is great. Let's go to the next one. Another Edwin Hubble from the Observational Approach to Cosmology on page 63. Quote, thus the theory might be valid provided the universe were packed with matter to the very threshold of perception. Nevertheless, the ever-expanding model of the first kind seems rather dubious. It cannot be ruled out by the observation, but it suggests a forced interpretation of the data. The disturbing features are all introduced by the recession factors, by the assumption that redshifts are velocity shifts. The departure from a linear law of redshifts, the departure from uniform distribution, the curvature necessary to restore homogeneity, the excess material demanded by the curvature, each of these is merely the recession factor in another form. If the recession factor is dropped, if redshifts are not primarily velocity shifts, the picture is simple and plausible. There is no evidence of expansion and no restriction of the timescale, no trace of spatial curvature, and no limitation of spatial dimensions. Moreover, there is no problem of internebular material, and for those who don't know, internebular material is considered today's dark energy, dark matter. So if you understand this quote, you basically will understand that he's saying that, yeah, if we drop these recession factors, and we don't consider these red shifts to be velocity shifts, then all of a sudden there is no evidence of expansion. There is no restriction of the time scale. There's no spatial curvature. There's no limitation of spatial dimensions. And there is no dark matter or dark energy. But all those things are included in the current model because they have to, if you want to believe what you're told about the universe. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Again, I love to read things like this. The disturbing features are all introduced by the recession factors by the assumption. So again, all of their science is based on assumptions. And if they're faulty, then what? Well, we'll find out as more quotes come along. How about physicist James Coleman? Quote, "The easiest explanation was that the Earth was fixed in the ether and that everything else in the universe moved with respect to the Earth and the ether. Such an idea was not considered seriously, since it would mean, in effect, that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe with all other heavenly bodies paying homage by moving around it." Again, telling you what the easiest explanation is for the data, for the observations, for the real science, for the tests, for the experiments. However, such an idea was not considered seriously, since it might mean that we're the center. It might mean we're important. When guys look around the universe, even if you believe like the heliocentrists believe and all these other, there's no life anywhere. There's nothing going on anywhere. And yet he says it's not considered seriously because it would mean in effect that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe. Well, what's wrong with that? It's your worldview. It's their worldview. Let's go on to the next one by Ernst Mach. Quote, "All masses, all motion, indeed, all forces are relative. There is no way to discern relative from absolute motion when we encounter them. Whenever modern writers infer an imaginary distinction between relative and absolute motion from a Newtonian framework, they do not stop to think that the Ptolemaic and the Copernican are both equally true." End quote. I don't know what else I need to tell you, besides they're teaching one in school. They do not even fathom the thought that we could be the center, and everything I'm about to read to you tonight will prove otherwise. I'll tell you that it's an equally true position to place yourself in, but look at the nature of our world, look at what's happened to our world, and then think, well, what if everybody knew that we were the center? What if everybody knew how important Earth is? Would that change their perspective? People just care, I'm going to go with Elon Musk to Mars. It's going to be great. And they can't put a camera on the moon for God knows what reason. But again, let's just continue on. Here we go. This is, just read the whole quote. Quote, "It is shown that the cosmological interpretation of redshift and the spectra of quasars leads to yet another paradoxical result, namely, that the Earth is the center of the universe." End quote. Got another quote from the same person. "The Earth is indeed the center of the universe. The arrangement of quasars on certain spherical shells is only with respect to the Earth. These shells would disappear if viewed from another galaxy or quasar. This means that the cosmological principle will have to go. Also, it implies that a coordinate system fixed to the Earth will be the preferred frame of reference in the universe. Consequently, both the special theory and general theory of relativity must be abandoned for cosmological purposes." YP, end quote. YP Varshny. You need to read this quote again. I'll be here all night if I go through each quote word for word, but you just need to understand what he's saying here. That based on the observation, now all of a sudden, it means that the cosmological principle will have to go. And we're about 2 quotes away from getting to the cosmological principle and the Copernican principle. I'll be reading those for you. It just tells you right here. And consequently, all the theories of relativity must be abandoned, but yet today it's being taught as fact. Let's go to the next one. Physicist Richard Wolfson. Quote, quote, "If the Earth, isn't moving relative to the ether, then Earth alone among the cosmos is at rest relative to the ether. Now, that may be an absurd possibility, but maybe it's true. I think you can see that this is not going to be very philosophically satisfying, and it isn't satisfying physically either, but it violates the Copernican principle that the Earth isn't special. It is particularly absurd in light of what we know from modern cosmology, namely that there are places in the universe, distant galaxies in particular, that are moving away from us at speeds very close to the speed of light. It's absurd to imagine that everything in the universe is pinned to Earth when there are such a wide range of speeds relative to Earth throughout the universe, but it suffices to rule it out on this philosophical ground." End quote. So again, this is a very important quote, and we're going to be talking about the Copernican principle here shortly. And again, this is just funny what they say. I think you can see that this is not going to be very philosophically satisfying. And again, now this may be an absurd possibility. Why is it absurd? Because of the worldview of the scientists. Again, want to believe in them and their worldview, be my guest. I choose not to. One more quote of prime importance here. This is Albert Einstein in his Kyoto address, How I Created the Theory of Relativity. He says, I have come to believe that the motion of quote, I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, though the Earth is revolving around the sun. End quote. There's no more definition of pseudoscience than this right here. Okay? It is. There's no experiment. However, my belief. That's what he's saying. Yeah, well, I've come to believe that there is no motion, there is no experiment that can prove that the Earth moves. However, the Earth revolves around the sun. Oh boy, it's pseudoscience. That's all it is. All right, let's move on to the Copernican principle. And I'm going to be reading this from Wikipedia. The Copernican principle. In physical cosmology, the Copernican principle is an alternative name for the principle of relativity, stating that humans on Earth or in the solar system are not privileged observers of the universe. Named for Copernican heliocentrism, it is a working assumption that arises from a modified cosmological extension of Copernicus's argument of moving Earth. In some sense, it's equivalent to the mediocrity principle. Let's review what the mediocrity principle is. The mediocrity principle is the philosophical notion that if an item is drawn at random from one of several sets or categories, it's likelier to come from the most numerous category than from any of the less numerous categories. The principle has been taken to suggest that there is nothing very unusual about the evolution of the solar system, Earth's history, the evolution of biological complexity, human evolution, or any one nation. It is a heuristic in the vein of the Copernican principle and is sometimes used as a philosophical statement about the place of humanity. The idea is to assume mediocrity rather than starting with the assumption that a phenomenon is special, privileged, exceptional, or even superior. But again, as I just stated, look at the universe around you, look everywhere, and where do you see life? Where do you see importance? Where do you see nature? Where do you see growth? Where do you see all these things happen here on Earth? So when someone says there's nothing very unusual about the evolution of the solar system, Earth's history, the evolution, it is. What is it? What are you talking about? It's extremely unusual. It's of prime importance. Let's continue. This is the back to the Copernican principle from Wiki. Hermann Bondi named the principle after Copernicus in the mid-20th century. Although the principle itself dates back to the 16th and 17th century paradigm shift away from the Ptolemaic system, which placed the Earth at the center of the universe. Copernicus proposed that the motion of the planets could be explained by reference to an assumption that the Sun and not the Earth is centrally located and stationary. He argued that the apparent retrograde motion of the planets is an illusion caused by Earth's movement around the Sun, which the Copernican model placed at the center of the universe. Copernicus himself was mainly motivated by technical dissatisfaction with the earlier system and not by support for any mediocrity principle. In fact, although the Copernican heliocentric model is often described as demoting Earth from its central role it had in the Ptolemaic geocentric model, it was successors to Copernicus, notably the 16th century Giordano Bruno, who adopted this new perspective. The Earth's central position had been interpreted as being in the lowest and filthiest parts. Instead, as Galileo said, the Earth is part of the dance of the stars, rather than the sump where the universe's filth and ephemera collect. In the late 20th century, Carl Sagan asked, "Who are we?" We find that we live on an insignificant planet of a humdrum star, lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe, in which there are far more galaxies than people. I'm going to end that quote there. Just because I want to make a comment on this, of course, we've all heard Carl Sagan say this, but even after just the few quotes I've already read, do you understand the problem here? That scientifically speaking, you can't discount the Earth being the center. And here comes Carl Sagan, the science pusher, the science popularist, who says, who are we? We find ourselves that we live on an insignificant planet of a, well, that's your worldview. So thank you for pushing your worldview on us, on me, on my children, on all children across the world. Beautiful, really, really tremendous for you. In cosmology, if one assumes the Copernican principle and observes that the universe appears isotropic, or that the same in all directions from a vantage point of Earth, then one can infer that the universe is generally homogeneous, or the same everywhere at any given time, and is also isotropic about any given point. These two conditions make up the cosmological principle. In practice, astronomers observe that the universe has heterogeneous or non-uniform structures up to the scale of galactic superclusters, filaments, and great bulbs. It becomes more and more homogeneous and isotropic when observed at larger and larger scales with little detectable structure on scales of more than about 200 million parsecs. However, on scales comparable with the radius of the observable universe, we see systematic changes with distance from Earth. For instance, galaxies contain more young stars and are less clustered, and quasars appear more numerous. While this might suggest that the Earth is the center of the universe, the Copernican principle requires us to interpret it as evidence for the evolution of the universe with time. This distant light has taken almost the age of the universe to reach Earth and shows the universe when it was young. The most distant light of all, cosmic microwave background radiation, is isotropic to at least 1 part in 1,000. Modern mathematical cosmology is based on the assumption that the cosmological principle is almost but not exactly true at the largest scales. The Copernican principle represents the irreducible philosophical assumption needed to justify this when combined with the observations. Michael Rowan Robinson emphasizes that the Copernican principle as the threshold test for modern thought, asserting that it is evident that in the post-Copernican era of human history, no well-informed or rational person can imagine that the Earth occupies a unique position in the universe. Unbelievable. This is all from Wikipedia, Copernican principle. You can read it yourself. I just copied it over and highlighted a few important parts. Again, they say, oh, well, this might suggest that the Earth is in the center. The Copernican principle itself, this is not scientific. This is an assumption. We saw earlier George Ellis saying that the assumption is made because they don't want to be in the center. And it's saying the Copernican principle requires us to interpret it as evidence for what? The principle of something requires us to, boy. It's crazy here. This last sentence here, talking about the Copernican principle, represents the irreducible philosophical assumption needed to justify this when combined with the observations. Notice it's irreducible philosophical assumption. This is not science. This is pseudoscience. The beliefs that we have been taught are not actual science. They're not scientific. Let's continue on here. This is just no particular quote. I think I wrote it, or no, I had it. So I said, what is the basis of the modern science and technology? Because according to science establishment historians, heliocentrism is of course the cause. An online encyclopedia put it this way, quote, the scientific revolution can be roughly dated as having begun in 1543, the year in which Nicholas Copernicus published his De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium. However, the origins of much modern technology can be traced back, end quote, that was the end of the encyclopedia. Now I'm speaking. However, the origins of much modern technology can be traced back to the elaborate mechanical devices that sprung up in post-medieval Europe. Those toys are an outgrowth of medieval craft of clockmaking, and that craft, in turn, was an offshoot of the craft of applying complex mechanical technology for the purpose of astronomy-related needs. These devices were unambiguously geocentric, every one of them. This is something that even the researchers of the Antikythera mechanism, which you can see pictured below, who mostly are believers of a heliocentric model of the universe, assert, perhaps grudgingly. They obviously don't want everyone to know that devices like this ancient piece of clockwork expose the ancient roots of modern technology. This Antikythera mechanism is based off a geocentric model. They don't want you to know that they were able to predict everything, eclipses to equinoxes, everything from a geocentric point of view. They had no idea. Oh, we're flying through ample space. Nonsense. So now I want to read, as we continue on about the Copernican principle. This is the very interesting thing. I think I can do it. Just to show you, this is the actual pictures from Copernicus's book, The Revolution of the Heavenly Spheres, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a very interesting passage at the beginning of this book. You see here it says basically to the reader of this hypothesis. Probably the correct translation. And you'll notice down here, it gets down here, and then it's signed Valen, okay, which means goodbye in Latin. So the weird thing about this is it appeared in the beginning as the preface of Copernicus's book, but now we're told it's written by Andreas Osiander. The story is ridiculous. The story is that Copernicus, on his deathbed, gives his book to be published now. Okay, you can publish my masterwork. You can publish it now. And the person he gave it to went in, supposedly this Andreas Osiander, who happened to be stepping in for the real book publisher at the time. He steps in and writes a preface to the book. Doesn't sign his name. Makes it look like it's by Copernicus. And then publishes all the copies of the book, and Copernicus never knew this statement was in the book. That's the actual belief nutties. You gotta be kidding me. And look, there's even a little drawing of the beginning of it, just like there is throughout the whole book. So, I mean, he went and did an additional drawing. He drew this when Copernicus drew the rest. It's just such a joke. But let's read what he said, because a lot of people quote this to Copernicus, and I can see why. But really, if you're quoting this, you should quote it to Andreas Osiander, because that's what we're told. That's what history says. It was not Copernicus who wrote this, that somebody else was able to write the preface to his book and he didn't know about it. Alright, to the reader concerning the hypothesis of this work. There have already been widespread reports about the novel hypothesis of this work, to which declares that the Earth moves whereas the Sun is at rest in the center of the universe. Hence, certain scholars, I have no doubt, are deeply offended and believe that the liberal arts, which are established long ago on a sound basis, should not be thrown into confusion. But if these men are willing to examine the matter closely, they will find that the author of this work has done nothing blameworthy, for it is the duty of an astronomer to compose the history of the celestial motions through careful and expert study. Then he must conceive and devise the causes of these motions or hypotheses about them. Since he cannot in any way attain to the true causes, he will adopt whatever suppositions enable the motions to be computed correctly in principles of geometry for the future as well as the past. The present author has performed both these duties excellently, for these hypotheses need not be true or even probable. On the contrary, if they provide a calculus consistent with the observations, that alone is enough. Perhaps there is someone who is so ignorant of geometry and optics that he regards the epicycle of Venus as probable, or thinks that this is the reason why Venus sometimes precedes and sometimes follows the Sun by 40 degrees or even more. Is there anyone who is not aware that from this assumption it necessarily follows that the diameter of a planet at perigee should appear more than 4 times, and if the body of a planet more than 16 times as great as the apogee? Yet this variation is refuted by the experience of every age. In this science there are some other, no less important absurdities, which need not be set forth at the moment. For this art, it is quite clear, it is completely and absolutely ignorant of the causes of the apparent non-uniform motions. And if any causes are devised for the imagination, as indeed very many are, they are not put forward to convince anyone that they are true, but merely to provide a reliable basis for computation. However, since different hypotheses are sometimes offered for one and the same motion, for example, eccentricity of an epicycle for the Sun's motion, the astronomer will take his first choice, the hypothesis which is the easiest to grasp. The philosopher will perhaps rather seek some semblance of truth, but neither of them will understand any state of anything certain unless it has been divinely revealed to them. Therefore, alongside the ancient hypotheses, which are no more probable, let us permit these new hypotheses also to become known, especially since they are admirable as well as simple, and bring with them a huge treasure of very skillful observations. So far as hypotheses are concerned, let no one expect anything certain from astronomy, which cannot furnish it, lest he accept as truth ideas conceived for another purpose, and depart from this study a greater fool than when he entered it. Farewell. Or goodbye, based on my vale is goodbye. Anyway, when you find this online, you'll usually you'll see it signed XX, and then it will say that it's Andreas Osiander, but just read the book. It's not signed by anybody. It says goodbye, and then Nicholas Copernicus begins his book. So I guess somebody snuck in, put this preface in there, and then didn't tell Copernicus that he died on his deathbed, which, you know, my beliefs on that, I don't think at all anybody who publishes a book on their deathbed is just ridiculous. All right. So, I mean, you can go through it again. There's so much in this that would take me forever, but I think the most important part is simply the end. So far as hypotheses are concerned, let no one expect anything certain from astronomy, which cannot furnish it, lest he accept as truth. So, are you somebody who accepts what Copernicus said is truth? Most people are. 99% of the world are. And the book tells you itself that if you accept it as truth, ideas conceived for another purpose, you will depart from this study a greater fool than when you entered it. 99% of the world fall into this exact statement right now. I was one of them too. Yeah. My whole life believing that these things were true until I did the research, looked into it myself, studied these quotes, looked at what we're told, looked for the experiments, looked for the proof that we spin around the sun, and all of a sudden I realized exactly what you'll realize by the end of this video. There is none. Let's continue. I read this at the opening of the show. Quote, I have already known for a long time that we do not yet have a proof for a system of Copernicus, but I shall not take the risk of being the first one to attack it. End quote, Alexander von Humboldt. Let's have the next quote here. Quote, dark energy is problematic. No one really knows what it is. We can make an educated guess and use quantum theory to estimate how much of it is there might be, but then we overshoot by an astounding factor of 10 to the 120. 20th. That is grounds enough, says George Ellis, to take a hard look at our assumptions about the universe and our place in it. If we analyze the supernova data, by assuming the Copernican principle is correct and get out something unphysical, I think we should start questioning the Copernican principle. Whatever our theoretical predictions are, they will in the end have to give way to the observational evidence. End quote. Real quick, I just want to comment on that part. George Ellis is basically saying if we get something unphysical, which is what dark matter is, which is what dark energy is, things that we can't observe, things that have never been noticed, but again, called scientific. But if these things are out there, then we need to look at the actual starting point. The starting point is exactly what we're discussing right now, the Copernican principle. We need to reassess it. Let's start a new quote. So, what would it mean? The outcome were that the Copernican principle, So what would it mean if the outcome were that the Copernican principle is wrong? It would certainly require a seismic reassessment of what we know about the universe. If the Copernican principle fails, all that goes with that, the Big Bang, goes out the window too. Cosmology would be back at the drawing board. If we are in a void, answering how we came to be in such a privileged spot in the universe would be the trick. And this is what you will learn by the end of this video. End quote, sorry. Marcus Chown is here. Let's go to the next quote. Timothy Clifton from Oxford, astrophysics member, PhD. Quote, a fundamental presupposition of modern cosmology is the Copernican principle, that we are not in a central or otherwise special region of the universe. Studies of type 1a supernova together with the Copernican principle have led to the inference that the universe is accelerating in its expansion. The usual explanation for this is that there must be a dark energy to drive the acceleration. Alternatively, it could be the case that the Copernican principle is invalid, and that the data has been interpreted within an inappropriate theoretical framework. If we were to live in a special place in the universe, near the center of a void where the local matter density is low, the supernova observations would be accounted for without the addition of dark energy. End quote. So again, I've talked about this before, and I've had people come at me and say, oh, prove what you're saying, prove what you're saying. So I'll show you several quotes that all admit that if the Earth is the center, it gets rid of everything, dark energy, dark matter, which currently is said to be 97% of the universe, or 95%. And it's never been observed. Guys, we're at what, 20 quotes now, 25 quotes? Is it obvious yet that we are being handed pseudoscience? I don't think there's any question about it. Again, what he's saying here is, well, it could be the case that the Copernican principle is invalid. It absolutely is if you're basing it on observations, and that the data has been interpreted within an inappropriate theoretical framework. Let's continue. Remember, we're talking right now about the Copernican principle. I do have these things separated out. We haven't even got to experiments yet. We haven't even got to the fixed Earth yet. We haven't even got to the centrality of Earth yet. We're still around the Copernican principle. Let's continue. Jonathan I. Katz from The Biggest Bangs. His book is listed below here. Quote, the uniform distribution of burst arrival direction tells us that the distribution of gamma ray burst sources in space is a sphere or spherical shell with us at the center. Some other extremely contrived and implausible distributions are also possible. But Copernicus taught us that we are not in a special preferred position in the universe. Earth is not at the center of the solar system, the sun is not at the center of the galaxy, and so forth. There is no reason to believe we are the center of the distribution of gamma ray bursts. If our instruments are sensitive enough to detect the bursts at the edge of the spatial distribution, then they should not be isotropic on the sky, contrary to observation. If our instruments are less sensitive, then the end of the S3/2 it is, law should hold, also contrary to observation. That is the Copernican dilemma. To this day, after the detection of several thousand bursts and despite earnest efforts to show the contrary, no deviation from a uniform random distribution, which is isotropic, in the direction of gamma ray bursts on the sky has ever been convincingly demonstrated. Again, you guys are admitting that there is no experiments or tests that prove what they're trying to prove. Okay, they just are able to explain it away, and we'll talk about that here shortly. Physicist Richard Wolfson, quote, so if the Earth is at rest relative to the ether, then it alone is at rest. That makes us pretty special. Do you really want to return to a parochial pre-Copernican ideas? Do you really think you and your planet are so special that in all the rich vastness of the universe, you alone can claim to be at rest, end quote? Well, I particularly do, because this is all I've seen. All I get from you is pictures from space of Pluto with the dog Pluto on him. I mean, What are you talking about? The Earth is all there is, folks. Let's continue. Richard Liu, here's his quote. Quote, cosmology is not even astrophysics. All the principal assumptions in this field are unverified or unverifiable in the laboratory, and researchers are quite comfortable with inventing unknowns to explain the unknown. How then could, after 50 years of failed attempts in finding dark matter, the fields of dark matter, dark energy, have become so lofty priorities in astronomy funding to the detriment of all other branches of astronomy? I demonstrate in this article that while some of this is based upon truth, at least just as much of the, I believe that's cosmic microwave background, might have put that wrong, cosmology has been propped up by a paralyzing amount of propaganda which suppress counter-evidence and subdue competing models. I believe astronomy is no longer heading towards a healthy future unless funding agencies rethink their master plans by backing away from such a high emphasis on groping the dark.
Let's get this show on the road.
Let's move on here. We got Hawking and Ellis, 73. Quote, we shall interpret the Copernican principle as stating that the universe is approximately spherical, symmetrical, with every point, since it's approximately spherical, symmetrical around us. Again, just more evidence. End quote. My bad. Jeez, bad Aaron. I should be punished. People are just joining me. The problem is they keep commenting in the middle of quotes, and I'm trying not to do that, so I'll be more careful going forward. But anyway, I do want to comment after them, and again, this quote is just saying that we are the center. Let's go on to the next one. This is George Ellis in his book. Quote, additionally, we must take seriously the idea that the acceleration apparently indicated by supernova data could be due to large-scale inhomogeneity with no dark energy. Observational tests of the latter possibly are as important as pursuing the dark energy exotic physics option in a homogeneous universe. Theoretical prejudices as to the universe's geometry and our place in it must bow to such observational tests, precisely because of the foundational nature of the Copernican principle for standard cosmology. We need to fully check this foundation, and one must emphasize here that the standard cosmic microwave background anisotropy studies do not prove the Copernican principle, they assume it at the start. End quote. Hugely important, begging the question. They're assuming it at the start. Presuppositions, again, how many quotes have we gone through, guys? 30? I don't know. But it should be clear here that we're dealing with pseudoscientists. Let's read the next one. Alan Hirschfeld in his book, 2001, quote, in Newton's day, the Ptolemaic system and the Keplerian version of the Copernican system were taught side by side in the universities of the world, but the pendulum of belief had swung irreversibly to the Copernican side. In the minds of most scientists, the heliocentric universe had become fact. Yet, there remained a crucial missing element in what was otherwise a complete and compelling picture of the universe. Not one shred of indisputable observational proof existed that the Earth moved through space. Here, then, was the holy grail of many of an astronomer, to prove that the Earth, in fact, revolved in a mighty orbit around the Sun. The parallax of just one star, any star, had to be detected. The hunt for stellar parallax was on. End quote. Very important here. A lot of people might be jumping out of their seats saying, but we have shown parallax. There is parallax in the stars. They've shown it now. It's a little tiny bit that nobody can actually see. So guys with a telescope in a hill can do it. We'll get to that. Remember that? I promise you we'll come back to that fact, and I'll show you why it doesn't happen. Let's go with Max Born in his book, Einstein's Theory of Relativity from 1962. Quote, thus, we may return to Ptolemy's point of view of a motionless Earth. One has to show that the transformed metric can be regarded as produced according to Einstein's field equations by distant rotating masses. This has been done. By Thuring, he calculated a field due to a rotating, hollow, thick-walled sphere and proved that inside the cavity it behaved as though there were centrifugal and other inertial forces usually attributed to absolute space. Thus, from Einstein's point of view, Ptolemy and Copernicus are equally right. End quote. Next one. This is Otto Neugebauer, 68. Quote, the popular belief that Copernicus's heliocentric system constitutes a significant simplification. Okay, let's start over. Have a drink of water here. Alright, I'm back. Alright, let's try that again. Quote, the popular belief that Copernicus's heliocentric system constitutes a significant simplification of the Ptolemaic system is obviously wrong. The choice of the reference system has no effect on the structure of the model, and the Copernican models themselves require about twice as many circles as the Ptolemaic models and are far less elegant and adaptable. Modern historians, making ample use of the advantage of hindsight, stress the revolutionary significance of the heliocentric system and the simplification it has introduced. In fact, the actual computation of the planetary positions follows exactly the ancient patterns, and the results are the same. The Copernican solar theory is definitely a step in the wrong direction for the actual computation, as well as the underlying kinematic concepts. End quote. Hugely important quote there. Hopefully you understood it. But again, if you understand that we're talking about a worldview, then these quotes start to make sense. Then you understand, well, wait a second, if the actual computation of planetary positions follows the ancient patterns and the results are the same, then why go look at all the heliocentric globies out there that will go around and tell everybody that science has already proven that science, how do we know when the eclipses are? Where's your flat earth or your geocentric proof that the eclipses work that way? By the way, you may not know this, but all of NASA's computations for eclipses are done by a man named Fred Esperneck, and Fred Esperneck uses geocentrism as his base. But yet the heliocentric model is true, even though you can't use it as a basis to figure out when the eclipses are. Oh boy, let us continue. We got 3 more quotes within the Copernican principle. So here we go. Wessel Valkenburg. Let's go ahead and quote this. Quote, the Copernican principle states that humans are not privileged observers of the universe and provides our philosophical basis for assuming that on the largest scales the universe is spatially homogeneous. While it is one of the foundational aspects of modern cosmology, this assumption remains untested outside of the standard paradigm. Though it may seem pedantic to test something so obvious, the standard paradigm itself is built on shaky foundations, relying on an unexplained, gravitationally repulsive, dark energy component for observations to fit the model. The implications of this cannot be overstated. Assuming that the laws of physics do apply equally everywhere in the universe, the only non-Copernican configuration possible is one in which we live in a place that originates from the special initial conditions. Okay. End quote. Very important quote. So much there. I can just read it again. Hopefully you got it. But there's... What else do you need to see? That again, we're seeing this over and over again, that they're basing all of their science, what they call science, on philosophical criteria, a philosophical basis. That, folks, is philosophy, not science. Okay? And I don't mind if they want to philosophize. I do all the time. I actually prefer philosophy than I do to science. I'd rather sit and listen to somebody tell me how they feel and how they look at the world and what they gather from it. That's great. That's what I want. But if I'm told something is science, then I'm pretty much going to accept that as being true, right? That's what we're taught. But now I can never think that way anymore. Never. Why? Because I realized science operates within a preferred. They have a deeply philosophical bias. Deeply severe philosophical bias. Why? Because philosophically, these guys don't want there to be a center, let alone it be us. I mean, again, go back to that Hubble quote, intolerable. Stephen Hawking saying it's a modesty. I mean, if we allow Earth to be in the center, they think it's prideful. So what do? They figure out a way that fits their worldview. There's nothing more prideful than that. Okay? Anyway, let's continue on with the next quote. Excuse me. This is from a science article, September 26, 2008, called Dark Energy, Is It Merely an Illusion? Quote, although dark energy may seem a bit contrived to some, the Oxford theorists are proposing an even more outrageous alternative. They point out that it's possible that we simply live in a very special place in the universe. Specifically, we're in a huge void where the density of matter is particularly low. The suggestion flies in the face of the Copernican principle, which is one of the most useful and widely held tenets in physics. Copernicus was among the first scientists to argue that we're not in a special place in the universe, and that theory suggests that we're special is most likely wrong. The principle led directly to the replacement of the Earth-centered concept of the solar system with the more elegant sun-centered model. Dark energy may seem like a stretch, but it's consistent with the venerable Copernican principle. The proposal that we live in a special place in the universe, on the other hand, is likely to shock many scientists. End quote. So yeah, these guys were just talking about, the fact that observationally, we might be the center. It's so upsetting because we know that the Copernican principle is the most useful and widely held tenets in physics. No, it's not. Give me a break. That's what they teach you. That's what they want you to believe. That this belief that we travel around the sun is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Give me a break. Got one more quote for the Copernican principle. Here we go. It's by physicist Hans Reichenbach, and this is 1970. Quote, "It is very important to acknowledge that the Copernican theory offers a very exact calculation of the apparent movements of the planets, even though it must be conceded that from the modern standpoint, practically identical results could be obtained by means of a somewhat revised Ptolemaic system. It makes no sense, accordingly, to speak of a difference in truth between Copernicus and Ptolemy. Both conceptions are equally permissible descriptions. What has to be considered as the greatest discovery of Occidental wisdom, as opposed to that of antiquity, is questioned as to its truth value." End quote. Sorry. Unbelievable. Unbelievable that they come out and say this. And yeah, that's why, some of them are actually out there really trying to do science. But it's pseudoscience. They have a worldview. We've already gone through this many times over. But again, this is a great sentence here at the end of it. What has been considered as the greatest discovery of Occidental wisdom, which is that we go around the sun, as opposed to that of antiquity, which was a flat, motionless, geocentric Earth, is questioned as to its true value. But yet, it's the greatest truth that's ever come to mankind. Let's go on. All right, so now we're on to experiments, and I just have a couple quotes about that. Most people know about the Michelson-Morley experiment, right? That it failed to detect any movement of the Earth around the sun. This had to be overcome, so they invented the Fitzgerald-Lorentz shortening of the apparatus. This is what was proposed, and eventually the paradoxical relativity theory was invented by Einstein to overcome the problem. However, there are 3 other experiments that have been deliberately ignored by universities because they support a central and a non-moving Earth. Just again, if you don't realize what's going on here, they've done tests, Michelson-Morley, because they can send lights around, bounce them off mirrors, and they said, hey, if the Earth is moving, then these light beams will arrive at different times when they get back, because if you're moving in the direction of the Earth's spin or moving against it, and we're about to find out that they could never find any change. So what did they do? They say that the reason that we see that is because of the Fitzgerald shortening of the device. So the apparatus actually shortens, and that's because, the apparatus shortens when it's going in the motion of the Earth. Absolute and total nonsense that has never been proven. Again, the very definition of pseudoscience. So the first experiment is the Michelson gale. You may not know about this one. This one detected that the ether passing the surface of the Earth with an accuracy of 2% of the speed of the daily rotation of the Earth. Thus, the Michelson-Morley experiment detected no movement of the Earth around the sun. The test after that was Airy's failure. Telescopes have to be very slightly tilted to get the starlight going down the axis of the tube because of the Earth's speed around the sun. Airy tried this test. He filled a telescope with water that greatly slowed down the speed of light inside the telescope and found that he did not have to change the angle of the telescope. This showed us that the starlight was already coming in at the correct angle, so that no change was needed. This demonstrated that it was actually the stars moving relative to a stationary Earth, and not the fast-orbiting Earth moving relative to the stationary stars. If it was the telescope moving, he would have had to change the angle of his telescope. That's experiment number 2. Let's talk about experiment number 3, the Sagnac experiment. Sagnac rotated a table complete with light and mirrors, with the light being passed in opposite directions around the table between the mirrors. He detected the movement of the table by the movement of the interference fringes on the target, where they were recombined. This proved that there is an ether, and that the light has to pass through this completely destroys Einstein's theory of relativity that says that there is no ether. It is for this reason that this experiment is completely ignored by scientists. More recently, Cantor has found the same exact result with a similar apparatus. All these tests and experiments are never taught in universities, so consequently, scientists are ignorant to the evidence of a stationary Earth. Let's just put these up real quick. They're also in the description. These are the links to each paper if you want to read about Michelson-Morley, Michelson-Gale, Sagnac, and Airy's failure. Again, these are links that you can just click in the description of this if you want to go read, because a lot of people just don't know that they even exist. They don't care about those tests because they don't align with the worldview. But again, let me just stop here real quick and state something simple. You have to understand why the idea of geocentricity, the idea of a flat Earth, anything other than a heliocentric model, is absolutely untenable. It's disgusting. It's gross to anybody that's an atheist. You understand that? If they've gone around bashing, how about the godless engineer? Like that joke. If that guy goes around bashing, do you think he'll ever look into flat Earth or understand it or even try to? No, because the guy's gone around bashing God forever. I'm a godless engineer. Well, congratulations. Yes, you're accidental. You came from, an amoeba. Yeah, right. The whole world is evidence of creation. All of it. Everything that you see. The sun. The fact that we have eclipses. Life. Trees. Plants. The complexity of the human body. Everything. Evidence of design. And yet, you've got atheists out there. You think they'll ever look into this? You think they'll ever accept any of the work they're telling you? They don't care. They are the ones, just like these scientists. It's the absolute core of being in a unique position. It must be avoided at all costs. If you're Red's rhetoric, it must be avoided at all costs. You can't look at this stuff. You must go against it because of your worldview. You guys see what's going on here? I certainly do. Let's look at some quotes around these experiments. We're probably more than halfway done, maybe. Like I said, we still haven't got to centrality, fixed Earth, axis of evil. We haven't got the dark energy and dark matter. We haven't got the Newtonian physics. We haven't got the relativity. We haven't got the ether. Got a lot of way to go. Let's go to, these are quotes about the experiments. So Bernard Jaffe, quote, "The data were almost unbelievable. There was only one other possible conclusion to draw, that the Earth was at rest. This, of course, was preposterous." End quote. Comment on that. You should start to see a pattern here. You should start to recognize what I'm trying to show you. And again, the choice is up to you. I'm certainly not saying you have to believe what I do, because that's what I hate about what's being done in schools. That's what I hate about what's being done and what's being called science. Okay? I don't have to believe what you say just because that's your religious belief. I don't care. And that's the same for you. You do not have to believe what I would never tell you to believe what I do. My goal is that all these things were so eye-opening to me, they changed my life so profoundly that I want to offer them to you, and it's up to you. If they don't change your life, if you spit on me and call me a moron, go ahead. See if it bothers me. It doesn't. It doesn't even change a thing for my life. Okay? But these quotes did, and the stuff that I put in my videos did. And so my hope is by sharing them with the world, that at least you have the opportunity to consider for yourself, because it makes a big difference if we're the center of the earth, if we're the center of the universe, versus if we're some random speck in the endless vacuum of space. It's so totally ridiculous. Let's go to the next one. This is scientific historian Lincoln Barnett. Quote, "The Michelson-Morley experiment confronted scientists with an embarrassing alternative. On the one hand, they could scrap the ether theory, which had explained so many things about electricity, magnetism, and light, or if they insisted on retaining the ether, they had to abandon still more venerable Copernican theory that the Earth is in motion. To many physicists, it seemed almost easier to believe that the Earth stood still than that waves, light waves, electromagnetic waves, could exist without a medium to sustain them. It was a serious dilemma and one that split scientific thought for a quarter century. Many new hypotheses were advanced and rejected. The experiment was tried again by Morley and many others with the same conclusion. The apparent velocity of the Earth through the ether was zero." End quote. Again, you shouldn't have to read more of that. We'll just move on. The experiment was tried again by Morley and others. So if we're talking about science, which is based on experimentation, hypothesis-based experimentation, and they keep coming to the conclusion that the velocity of the Earth through space is zero, but what do they teach in schools? What did you grow up believing? Hopefully you see that this is the reason why, the name of this video is very simple. Quotes that tell us that we have all been lied to. Let us jump back over here. Let's continue. We've got Wolfgang Pauli. Quote, "The failure of many attempts to measure terrestrially any effects of the Earth's motion on physical phenomenon allows us to," and then he goes on and on. Thank you very much for the super chat. I'll read this again for 1 second. At this point, Wolfgang, he stops talking about the experimental evidence and then goes on talking about all the theories of Einstein, which are mathematics and formulas and Lorentz contractions, and it becomes pseudoscience. But he starts out by saying, yeah, we couldn't measure the effects of any motion of the Earth, but based on these formulas and these mathematics that Einstein gave us, relativity, we can say that it has. But again, tests don't show that. That is the definition of pseudoscience. Sir Arthur Eddington, Space-Time and Gravitation, page 20, quote, "The Michelson-Morley experiment has thus failed to detect our motion through the ether because the effect looked for, the delay of one of the light waves, is exactly compensated by an automatic contraction of the matter forming the apparatus." End quote. Again, I'll have to go back and listen again. because they're not seeing the shift in light that they expect, they then came up with the theory, oh, well, the apparatus, the testing apparatus, the one arm that's going in the direction that the Earth is spinning is shortening. And that's why the light rays are getting back at the same time, when clearly that proves that the Earth does not move, folks. Let's go to the next one. This is James A. Coleman, professor of physics and the chairman of the Department of Physics at the American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts. Quote, the explanation which had the most appeal in accounting for this negative result of the Michelson-Morley experiment was one that literally was dreamed up for that purpose. It is the so-called Fitzgerald-Lorentz contraction. In 1893, Fitzgerald suggested that all objects contracted in the direction of their motion through the ether. He reasoned that if ordinary objects flattened out upon impact with other objects, a rubber ball hitting a wall or a ripe tomato dropped on the floor, for example, then why would it not be possible for objects that move through the ether to have the force of the ether push them in or contract them? This would adequately explain the result of the Michelson-Morley experiment. The arm of the interferometer moving against the ether would be shortened, so that even though the light was traveling in that particular arm might have slowed down by the ether wind, this would be compensated for by having its path shortened. Objections to the Lorentz contraction hypothesis were rampant, as was to be expected, not only because there was no evidence to prove that such an effect took place, but particularly because Fitzgerald could not explain why objects would contract due to motion through the ether. The contraction hypothesis was originally advanced only as a possible explanation for Michelson and Morley's results, providing such an effect existed. Then, too, the theory said that all materials traveling with the same velocity with respect to the ether would contract the same fractional amount. Since iron is much heavier and stronger than wood, for example, one would expect a greater contraction for wood than for iron, but this, too, went unanswered. End quote. Again, just a fantastic quote here telling you exactly what's going on, showing you exactly that this is a worldview, that these guys are willing to make up anything. But this is what a heliocentrist would tell me if I said, well, what happened with Michelson-Morley? Well, you don't know about length contraction. You don't know that the arm of the apparatus was short during the test? Oh, can you show that to be proven? No, you cannot. It is an ad hoc explanation, excuse to cover up the results of an actual scientific experiment. Let's continue. Physicist Richard Wolfson. What happened when the experiment was done in 1887? There was never, any orientation at any time of year, any shift in the interference pattern, none. No shift, no fringe shift, nothing. What's the implication? Here was an experiment that was done to measure the speed of the Earth's motion through the ether. This was an experiment that was 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be. It could have detected speeds as low as 2 miles a second, instead of the known 2 miles per second that the Earth has in its orbital motion around the Sun. It didn't detect it. What's the conclusion from the Michelson-Morley experiment? The implication is that the Earth is not moving. End quote. Very important quote. We got Ronald W. Clark in his book Einstein, The Life and Times, 1971. Quote, the problem which now faced science was considerable, for there seemed to be only 3 alternatives. The first is that Earth was standing still, which meant scuttling the whole Copernican theory and was unthinkable. The second was that the ether was carried along by the Earth in its passage through space. The third solution was that the ether simply did not exist, which to many 19th century scientists was equivalent to scrapping current views of light, electricity, magnetism, and starting again. And so because they didn't want to start, end quote, sorry. And because they didn't want to start again, they just carried on with the belief. So it's ridiculous here again that you read, let me see the exact part that I was interested in. So the problem which now faced science was considerable. 3 alternatives, standing still, which meant, so this part. The first was that the Earth was standing still. So this is one of the possibilities, which meant scuttling the whole Copernican theory and was unthinkable. Science, ladies and gentlemen, right here for you. Andre K.T. Assisi, quote, in the Ptolemaic system, the Earth is considered to be at rest and without rotation in the center of the universe, while the Sun, other planets, and fixed stars rotate around the Earth. In relational mechanics, this rotation of distant matter yields the force. Now, the gravitational attraction of the Sun is balanced by a real gravitational centrifugal force due to the annual rotation of distant masses around the Earth, with a component having a period of 1 year. In this way, the Earth can remain at rest and is the essential constant distance from the Sun. The diurnal rotation of distant masses around the Earth with a period of 1 day yields a real gravitational centrifugal force, flattening the Earth at the poles. Foucault's pendulum is explained by a real Coriolis force acting on moving masses over the Earth's surface. The effect of this force will be to keep the plane of oscillation of the pendulum rotating around with the fixed stars, end quote. Excellent quote there. This is a quote from Robert Sungenis that I thought was pretty good. Let's see if we can do something. So quoting, one can imagine why many who are looking for proof of a rotating Earth would appeal to the Foucault pendulum. It seems illogical to posit that the reason the plane of the pendulum appears to be moving in a circle is that the Earth beneath it is rotating. In other words, the heliocentrist insists that the pendulum's circular motion is an illusion. The pendulum is actually moving back and forth in the same plane, and the Earth is turning beneath it. Since the Earth is too big for us to sense its rotation, we instead observe the plane of the pendulum rotate. All one needed to do to prove the Earth is rotating, he insists, is to reverse the roles. That is, imagine that the plane of the pendulum is stationary and the Earth beneath it is moving. This particular logic, however, doesn't prove that the Earth is rotating. One can begin the critique by asking this simple question. If the pendulum is constantly swinging in the same plane while the Earth is rotating beneath it, what force is holding the pendulum in that stationary position? In other words, if the plane of the pendulum is stationary with respect to what is it stationary? This is understood as the unresolved force of physics. The only possible answer is, it is stationary with respect to the rest of the universe, since it is certainly not stationary with respect to the Earth. With a little insight, one can see that this brings us right back to the problem that Einstein and the rest of modern physics faced with the advent of relativity theory. Is it the Earth that's rotating under fixed stars, or do the stars revolve around a fixed Earth? As Einstein said, the two sentences, the sun is at rest and the Earth moves, or the sun moves and the Earth is at rest, simply mean two different conventions concerning two different coordinate systems. As such, it would be just as logical, not to mention scientifically consistent, to post or to posit that the combined forces of the universe which rotate around the Earth are causing the plane of the pendulum to rotate around an immobile Earth. In other words, in the geocentric model of the movement of the pendulum is not an illusion, it really moves. According to Einstein, there is no difference between the two models. Ernst Mach, from whom Einstein developed many of his insights, stated much of the same. He writes, obviously it doesn't matter if we think the Earth is turning around its axis or at rest while the fixed stars revolve around it. Geometrically, these are the exact same case of relative rotation of the Earth and the fixed stars with respect to one another. But if we think that the Earth is at rest and the fixed stars revolving around it, there is no flat either, no Foucault's pendulum experiment, and so on. Robert Sungenis, that was Ernst Mach speaking there. Robert Sungenis continues here. Barber and Bertolotti proved that a large hollow sphere representing the distant star field rotating around a small solid sphere inside, modeling the Earth, produced exactly the same patterns of Coriolis and centrifugal forces that are claimed as proof of the Earth spinning in space. If the hollow shell of matter accelerates or rotates, any objects inside the shell will tend to be carried along with the acceleration or rotation to some extent. Thank you very much. Let's talk a little bit about begging the question, just so you understand some of these answers about the Michelson-Morley. This is from the cosmoquest.org forum that I found. How to commit the fallacy of begging the question when a conclusion to be demonstrated is assumed into a premise. Okay, so we got number one, an experiment is set up to demonstrate the motion of the Earth through space. Number two, a positive result is expected from that theory. Number three, the experiment produces a null result. Number four, the null result has a cause. Number five, the cause of the null result is not a stationary Earth, but because the Earth is moving. Number six, the cause of the null result is a moving Earth. Number seven, therefore an experiment on the moving Earth has demonstrated that C is constant in any internal inertial reference frame. 8, therefore C is constant in all reference frames. Well, line 8 implies a moving Earth as part of the conclusion. Yet line 5 merely asserts that the Earth is moving. To conclude to line 8. Therefore, the constancy of C is invalid, according to the fallacy of begging the question. One second. Excuse me. The only way science can conclude to one of the special relativity's postulates is to beg the question of the motion of the Earth as shown above. The constancy of C in any inertial reference frame is known from a logical fallacy. The constancy of C in any inertial reference frame is a postulate of special relativity. Special relativity uses four-dimensional space to mathematically explain the Michelson-Morley null result. Minkowski space is four-dimensional and is used to explain special relativity. But as special relativity is founded on a fallacious postulate, then so too is Minkowski space is also founded on a fallacious postulate, and as a fallacy invalidates a theory, then guess what? Both special relativity and also Minkowski space are invalid. But again, you can look for yourself and you'll see that those things are considered explanations for the Michelson-Morley null result. All right, we're moving on to the centrality of Earth. right, so from George Ellis, quote, "This assumption is made because it is believed to be unreasonable that we should be near the center of the universe." So, end quote. Just point that out again. Very important one there. Let's go to the next one. Thomas S. Kuhn from the Copernican Revolution from his book 1959, quote, "Now imagine that the whole mechanism is picked up and put down again, with the sun fixed at the central position formerly held by the Earth. All of the geometric spatial relations of the Earth, Sun, and Mars are preserved, and since only the fixed point of the mechanism has been changed, all the relative motions must be identical. The Tychonic system is transformed to the Copernican system simply by holding the sun fixed instead of the Earth. The relative motion of the planets are the same in both systems, and the harmonies are therefore preserved." End quote. Let's go on about the centrality some more. This is the editor of Nature magazine, Paul C.W. Davies. Quote, "Often the simplest of observations will have the most profound consequences. It has long been a cornerstone of modern science, to say nothing of man's cosmic outlook, that the Earth attends a modest star that shines in an undistinguished part of a run-of-the-mill galaxy. Life arose spontaneously, and man evolved on this miscellaneous clump of matter, and now directs his own destiny without outside help. This cosmic model is supported by the Big Bang and expanding universe concepts, which in turn are buttressed by the simple observation that astronomers see redshifts wherever they look. These redshifts are due, of course, to matter flying away from us under the impetus of the Big Bang. But redshifts can also arise from the gravitational attraction of mass. If the Earth were at the center of the universe, the attraction of the surrounding mass of stars would also produce redshifts wherever we looked. This argument was advanced by George Ellis in his article, is more complex than this, but his basic thrust is to put man back into a favored position in the cosmos. His new theory seems quite consistent with our astronomical observations, even though it clashes with the thought that we are godless and making it on our own." End quote. Astronomer J.L.E. Dreyer, quote, "The Earth-centered system is in reality absolutely identical with the system of Copernicus, and all computation of the places of the planets are the same for the two systems." End quote. What more do you need to hear, folks? It's being spelled out for you over and over again. We're probably at 60 quotes at this point, and is it sinking in yet? That's the question. Let me continue. We got Fred Hoyle from his book Nicholas Copernicus, pages 82 and 83, quote, "We can take either the Earth or the Sun, or any point for that matter, as the center of the solar system. This is certainly so for the purely kinematical problem of describing the planetary motions. If we wish to consider the Earth to be at rest, it will be necessary to give an annual epicyclic motion." Can't dismiss such a procedure simply on the grounds of inconvenience or absurdity. End quote. Thank you very much for Fred Hoyle actually admitting that. However, he would be turning in his grave as well. Stephen Hawking in A Brief History of Time, quote, "All this evidence that the universe looks the same whichever direction we look might seem to suggest there is something special about our place in the universe. In particular, it might seem that if we observe all other galaxies to be moving away from us, then we must be at the center of the universe." End quote. But again, as I read earlier, Stephen Hawking changed that and says, but we dismiss this based on modesty. How scientific is that? dismissing something based on modesty is scientific. Let's continue on the centrality of Earth.
Ready to fire.
YP Varshni, quote, the Earth is indeed the center of the universe. The arrangement of quasars on certain spherical shells is only with respect to the Earth. These shells would disappear if viewed from another galaxy or quasar. This means that the cosmological principle will have to go. It also implies that the coordinate system fixed the Earth with a preferred reference frame in the universe. Consequently, both the special and general theory of relativity must be abandoned for cosmological purposes, end quote. I put this one in here again because we're talking about the centrality here, and what he's saying is the complete opposite of what we're taught. We're taught that no matter where you're at in the universe, that they would all see the same thing, and yet he's telling us that he is astrophysics. He's from his book, The Redshift Hypothesis for Quasars, but he's telling us that these shells would disappear if viewed from another galaxy or quasar, which completely means that we are in a very unique observing position, folks, in the universe. We are of prime importance. We are the apple of God's eye. Let's go to the next one. The Earth-centered system. I'm sorry. JLE Dreyer again. I think we already read this one. The Earth-centered system is in reality absolutely identical with the system of Copernicus, and all computation of the places of the planets are the same for the two systems. Next one. Henry Poincaré. Quote, a great deal of research has been carried out concerning the influence of the Earth's movement. The results were always negative. We do not have any means of discovering whether or not we are carried along in a uniform motion of translation, end quote. Again, we got another person telling you that we don't know whether the Earth moves, but it's being taught in schools to your children. How about Adolf Baker from Modern Physics and Anti-Physics? Quote, always the speed of light was precisely the same. Thus, the failure of Michelson-Morley to observe different speeds of light at different times of year suggested that the Earth must be at rest. It was therefore the preferred frame for measuring absolute motion in space. Yet we have known since Galileo that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Why should it be at rest in space? End quote. This is the way these guys think, you know? Yet we have known since Galileo that the Earth is not the center of the universe. So why should it be at rest in space? So they're discounting what the observations are telling you. They're discounting what the science tells you, what the experiments say. And say, but we've known since Galileo that the Earth is not the center. Next one on centrality. But what is less known is that, quote, but what is less known is that Tycho Brahe, Kepler's tutor, developed a geostatic system that was just as accurate and as elegant as Kepler's. The Sun orbits the Earth, and all the other planets orbit the Sun. The trajectories are ellipses, and all of Kepler's laws are satisfied. We can therefore conclude that the Sun's orbit in the Earth's pseudo-potential is equivalent to that observed from the Earth in the heliocentric system. The analysis of planetary motions has been performed in the Newtonian framework with the assumption of Mach's principle. The kinematical equivalence of the Copernican, the heliocentric, and the Neo-Tychonian geocentric systems is shown to be a consequence of the presence of pseudo-potential in the geocentric system, which, according to Mach, must be regarded as the real potential originating from the fact of simultaneous accelerations of the universe. If one could put the whole universe in accelerated motion around the Earth, the pseudo-potential corresponding to the pseudo-force will immediately be generated. That same pseudo-potential then causes the universe to stay in that very state of motion without the need of any exterior forces acting upon it. End quote. That's Luca Papa. Another quote on the centrality by astronomer Gerardus D. Bow, PhD. Quote, again, once more for the record, it has been shown at least 6 different ways this century alone. The equations of physics used by NASA to launch satellites are identical to the equations derived from a geocentric universe. Thus, if the space program is proof of anything, it proves geocentricity and disproves heliocentrism. The evidence for heliocentrism is even weaker than the evidence of evolution. End quote. Okay, let's move on to fixed Earth. Got more here. Let's see how much. Good. All right, we're on to fixed Earth quotes. Okay, here we go. This is Dennis W. Schema, Unity of the Universe, 1961 quote. According to his wiki, by the way, he's one of the founding fathers of modern cosmology. Quote, whether the Earth rotates once a day from west to east as Copernicus taught, or the heavens revolve once a day from east to west as his predecessors did, the observable phenomenon will be exactly the same. This shows a defect in Newtonian dynamics, since an empirical science ought not to contain a metaphysical assumption which can never be proved or disproved by observation. End quote. One of the most important quotes of the entire night, right there. Again, so important. Okay, here we go now. Let's move on. Alright, physicist Julian B. Barber, quote, "Thus, even now, 3.5 centuries after Galileo, it is still remarkably difficult to say categorically whether the Earth moves," end quote. Again, and here's how somebody might refute these, is they're going to come to me and say, yeah, but Julian Barber believes in the universe. He believes that the Earth does move. Yeah, I know that. Thank you. I understand the worldview of scientists. I completely been explaining it the entire show. But also, he tells you right here that it's still remarkably difficult, because there's no experiment that's ever shown it, to say categorically whether the Earth moves or not. I know what they believe. I'm not confusing that. All right, let's go back to Fred Hoyle in his book. He says that, quote, "We might hope, therefore, that the Einstein theory, which is well suited to such problems, would throw more light on matter. But instead of adding further support to the heliocentric picture of the planetary motions, the Einstein theory goes in the opposite direction, giving increased respectability to the geocentric picture." Again, this is Fred Hoyle. I think at one time, astronomer royale. Let's continue. This is from Einstein's Ether. It's a book from 2001. Quote, "According to Einstein, the argument over whether the Earth turns around the heavens... According to Einstein, the argument over whether the Earth turns around or the heavens revolve around it is seen to be no more than an argument over the choice of reference frames. There is no frame of reference from which an observer would not see the effects of the flattening of the poles. Thus, in frame number 1, the Earth turns around while the sky is at rest. The centrifugal force is a consequence of the Earth's motion, uniform acceleration, relative to the heavens. This causes the flattening. In the latter frame, number 2, the sky rotates and the Earth stands still, while the centrifugal force should be understood as being an effect of the rotating heavens, which is generating a gravitational field that causes the flattening at the poles. The two explanations are equivalent, as there is an equivalence between inertial and gravitational mass." So, end quote. Let's do it again. Very important quote there. Let's continue on. We're talking about the fixed Earth now, remember. This is from Martin Gardner. Quote, "Do the heavens revolve or does the Earth rotate? The question is meaningless. A waitress may just as sensibly ask a customer if he wanted ice cream on top of his pie or the pie placed under his ice cream." End quote. Very important quote here. Just, what are we at? 70 quotes now. I don't know what we're at. But whatever it is, are you starting to see what's going on here? They are identical systems. They're all just a model. We don't live on a model. Okay, we don't live in the geocentric model. We don't live in the Copernican model. We don't live in the heliocentric model. We live here on Earth. We live in reality. And yet, these guys have devised a way of explaining the world by giving you, all these distances, and that the Earth is just a tiny little speck. Even in the solar system, the Earth occupies 0.0000001% of the entire solar system, let alone if you look at the universe. And in my opinion, the Earth is all there is. So they've taken something that is 100% of importance and diminished it to 0.00001% of even the solar system. Who did that? Men with a worldview that say we cannot be the center, even though I'm reading quote after quote after quote after quote that says it's the same no matter what. So what are we doing? Teaching our children of the worldview of some men who hate God, their creator. Come on. Let's continue. Douglas C. G. Canoli said, quote, "This null result was one of the greatest puzzles of physics at the end of the 19th century. One possibility was that the velocity would be zero and no fringe should be expected. But this implies that the Earth is somehow a preferred object. Only with respect to the Earth would the speed of light be c as predicted by Maxwell's equations. This is tantamount to assuming that the Earth is the central body of the universe." Again, no comment needed, just more quotes from physicists that are telling you that the evidence shows us to be in the center. Here we go. We've got Fred Hoyle in his Copernicus book again. Quote, "Let it be understood at the outset that it makes no difference from the point of view of describing planetary motion whether we take the Earth or the Sun as the center of the solar system, since the issue is one of relative motion only. There are infinitely many exactly equivalent descriptions referred to different centers. In principle, any single point will do. The Moon, Jupiter. So the passions loosed on the world by the publication of Copernicus's book De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium were logically irrelevant." End quote. Again, were logically irrelevant. Let's go on. Bernard Cohen. Quote, "There is no planetary observation by which we on Earth can prove that the Earth is moving in an orbit around the Sun. Thus, all Galileo's discoveries can be accommodated to the system in which the daily rotation of the heavens is communicated to the Sun and the planets so that the Earth itself neither rotates nor revolves." might be getting annoying for some people. I'm sorry, just putting these all together don't kill the messenger. It's going to quote after quote. We might be, I don't know, maybe we're more than half done, I hope. Let's see here, Fred Hoyle. Quote, we know that the difference between a heliocentric theory and a geocentric theory is one of relative motion only, and that such a difference has no physical significance, end quote. I mean, folks, what, do you not see the problem yet? I'm not making these things up. That's what these guys are saying. If you want to believe them, if you want your children to learn the worldview of Fred Hoyle and the worldview of Einstein, and these guys who hated the idea of being a creation, that's fine. That's fine. I don't mean you can believe that if you want. For me, I think every human deserves to at least hear these things so that maybe they can change their worldview. Maybe they can change their belief system. And I know it's hard. I'm one who knows how hard it is because we all sat in a desk and handed prepackaged answers from teachers that we respected, teachers that we believed. Our parents told us that we were going to school to learn, so every one of us sat there and did exactly what we were supposed to do, learn the answers for the test. That's what we did. If you want to believe those things are true, even after everything I'm reading to you, it's on you. Let's go to the next one. Fred Hoyle again. Today we cannot say the Copernican theory is right and the Ptolemaic theory is wrong in any meaningful sense. The two theories are physically equivalent to one another. Science today is locked into paradigms. Every avenue is blocked by beliefs that are wrong. And if you try and get anything published in a journal today, you will run up against a paradigm and the editors will turn you down, end quote. Unbelievable quote right there. That's what we've all been saying. People say, well, why is there no papers about this in the science journals? Well, why don't you ask Fred Hoyle? He'll tell you right there. Science today is locked into paradigms. Every single avenue is blocked by beliefs that are wrong. And if you try and get anything published in a journal today, you will run up against a paradigm and the editors will turn you down. Lincoln Barnett, quote, no physical experiment ever proves that the Earth is actually in motion, end quote. I don't know what else I can tell you about that one. Let's continue. Albert Michelson. Quote, this conclusion directly contradicts the explanation which presupposes that the Earth moves, end quote. Beautiful. Next one, from a book cited in Stephen Hawking's A Stubbornly Persistent Illusion, 2007. Quote, to the question of whether or not the motion of Earth and space can be made perceptible in terrestrial experiments, we've already remarked that all attempts of this nature led to a negative result. Before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled to this negative result, end quote. Boy, folks, what else do you want to see? What else do you want to see? Think of what science is. They're doing a bunch of tests, experiments, to prove that the Earth moves. Then he says, we have already remarked that all attempts of this nature have led to a negative result, meaning all scientific tests and experiments have proven that the Earth does not move. Then he says, before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled with this negative result. Again, go back and listen to me talk about the transform equations, which are what were employed in the special relativity theories. So now we have to believe that apparatuses, testing apparatuses are shrinking. Oh boy. Thank you, Einstein, for the theory of relativity, because this theory, that's real good science. The theory of relativity, great science for your mental conceptions. Kenny Ferguson, quote, it is possible to describe the entire universe using any chosen point as the unmoving center. The Earth will do very well, and no one can prove that choice is wrong. Scientists today prefer to picture everything in motion, and nothing as being the center. If you haven't given much thought to the implications of 20th century science, you may be chagrined to realize that because of the concept of relative motion, no one can prove that the Earth moves, end quote. Is it getting to be just too heavy on your shoulders yet? Because that's what happened to me. It got to be too much. It's too much. When you realize that we're dealing with a worldview, men who are forcing their beliefs on you and your children, your grandchildren, then you might start to think about it. I think I skipped a couple of I'm sorry, I lost myself here. Thomas S. Kuhn here says, quote, ironically, the holy grail of many an astronomer to prove that the Earth is in fact revolving in a wide orbit around the Sun is claimed by this author to be a stellar parallax, which is adequately explained in a neotectonic geocentric system with the stars aligned on the sun, which revolves around the stationary Earth. Now imagine that the whole mechanism is picked up and put down again with the sun fixed in the central position formerly held by the Earth. All of the geometric spatial relations to the Earth, Sun, and Mars are preserved, and since only the fixed point of the mechanism has changed, all the relative motions must be identical. The Tychonic system is transformed into the Copernican system simply by holding the sun fixed instead of the Earth. The relative motion of the planets are the same in both systems, and the harmonies are therefore preserved, end quote. Again, I put that quote back in there. You might recognize this part, but maybe not this part. The reason I put this later is because I wanted to show that he's talking about, as we spoke about earlier, when people say, oh, but the parallax of the stars, what you don't realize is they've already tested this, and they're identical. It's the same. So keep coming with those arguments, and you just look to be more of a religious zealot than before. Let's continue. Arthur Eddington, quote, there was just one alternative. The Earth's true velocity through space might happen to have been nil, end quote. If you don't know what nil means, it means zero. None. Zero. Sorry. Let's go to the next one. G.J. Whitrow. The book says, quote, it is both amusing and instructive to speculate on what might have happened if such an experiment, like this Morley, could have been performed in the 16th or 17th centuries, when men were debating the rival merits of Copernicus and the Ptolemaic systems. The result would surely have been interpreted as conclusive evidence for the immobility of the Earth, and therefore as a triumphant vindication of the Ptolemaic system and irrefutable falsification of the Copernican hypothesis. The moral of this historical fantasy is that it is often dangerous to believe in the absolute verification or falsification of a scientific hypothesis. All judgments of this type are necessarily made in some historical context, which may be drastically modified by the changing perspective of human knowledge, end quote. Again, beautiful quote there, well said, and if you understand it, you'll realize that if the test that they did in the early 1900s, late 1800s, was done back in the days when people were questioning Copernicus, they would have trashed the Copernican model at its outset. Would have been gone. Would have been easily proven, but they weren't able to test that. And so those tests came along after they'd already accepted scientifically all of Copernicus's ideas. So, do you think they're going to go back and admit they were wrong in the face of everything that happened with the church? Come on. Absolutely not. Let's move on to the next one. This is from Darcy Pettyhoff. She is at the Royal Air Force College in England. Quote, one can of course believe anything one likes as long as the consequences of that belief are trivial. But when survival depends on belief, then it matters that beliefs correspond to manifest reality. We therefore teach navigators that the stars are fixed to a celestial sphere, which is centered on a fixed Earth, and around which it rotates in accordance with the laws clearly deducible from common sense observation. The sun and the moon move across the inner surface of this sphere, and hence, perforce, go around the Earth. This means that students of navigation must unlearn a lot of the confused dogma they learned in school. Most of them find this remarkably easy, because dogma is as it may be, but the real world is as we perceive it to be. If Andrew Hill will look into the Journal of Navigation, he will find that the Earth-centered universe is alive and well, whatever his readings of the Spectator may suggest. Beautiful quote here by somebody telling you, I don't know if she's a teacher at this college, but she's telling you, just come and look. We teach navigators that the Earth is fixed. We teach them that it's centered and that everything goes around us. That's what they teach. So for people who say, oh, the geocentricity nonsense, Earth-centered nonsense. Oh, why is it being taught to Air Force pilots? James A. Coleman, quote, the easiest explanation was that the Earth was fixed in the ether and that everything else in the universe moved with respect to the Earth and to the ether. Such an idea was not considered seriously, since it would mean, in effect, that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe, with all other heavenly bodies paying homage by moving around it. End quote. I believe I already read that one. I knew that would happen somewhere. Too many quotes to go through and see if I had them matched up. All right, here we go. Next one. Quote, the ancient argument over whether the Earth rotates or the heavens revolve around it, as Aristotle taught, is seen to be no more than an argument over the simplest choice of a frame of reference. Obviously, the most convenient choice is the universe. Nothing except inconvenience prevents us from choosing the Earth as a fixed frame of reference. If we choose to make the Earth our fixed frame of reference, we do not even do violence to everyday speech. We say that the sun rises in the morning, sets in the evening, the Big Dipper revolves around the North Star. Which point of view is correct? Do the heavens revolve, or does the Earth rotate? The question is meaningless, end quote. Martin Gardner, 1976 book. Again, if the question is meaningless, why is it that if I ask any scientist, or any atheist, or any science backer, hey, do we go around the sun or does the sun go around us? They will laugh at you. Lawrence was one of my videos, where Lawrence Krauss makes a joke to a crowd about how insane it is when people believe that the sun goes around the earth. What am I reading? What are these quotes? They're nothing. They're just meaningless. No. The question is meaningless of whether the heavens rotate, because it's all the same. But again, what is being taught? What is being forced down your throat at 6 years old? You tell me. All right, let's go on to the next one. This is Luka Popov again. Quote, abstract, using Mach's principle, we will show that the observed diurnal and annual motion of the Earth can just as well be accounted for as the diurnal rotation and annual revolution of the universe around the fixed and central Earth. This can be performed by postulating the existence of vector and scalar potentials caused by the simultaneous motions of masses in the universe, including the distant stars. End quote. Let's go here, Adolf Baker. Quote, always the speed of light was precisely the same. Thus, the failure of the Michelson-Morley to observe different speeds of light at different times of the year suggested that the Earth must be at rest. It was therefore the preferred frame for measuring absolute motion in space. Yet we have known since Galileo that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Why should it be at rest in space? Okay. Let's see here. Quote by Mark Gardner. Quote, one could just as legitimately assume that the Earth to be fixed and the entire universe within its great spherical cloud of black body radiation to be moving. The equations are the same. Indeed, from the standpoint of relativity, the choice of reference frame is arbitrary. Naturally, it is simpler to assume the universe is fixed than the Earth moving, other than the other way around. But the two ways of talking about the Earth's relative motion are two ways of saying the same thing. End quote. I don't know how many more you need to hear, but we're going to keep reading. Let's go. Ronald W. Clark, in his book from 1971, quote, the problem which now faced science was considerable, for there seemed to be only three alternatives. The first was that the Earth was standing still, which meant scuttling the whole Copernican theory, and was unthinkable. I'll end the quote there, because we've already read this one again. Let's move on here. Next one. Lorenz's 1886 paper, quote, briefly, everything occurs as if the Earth were at rest, end quote. Next one. Henry Pointer, quote, a great deal of research has been carried out concerning the influence of Earth's movement. The results were always negative. We do not have any means of discovering whether or not we are carried along in a uniform motion of translation. All right. That is all my fixed Earth quotes. We're moving on to the axis of evil. Hopefully you know what that is. I don't know if you do or don't. If you don't know what it is, then you haven't watched the movie The Principle. You need to watch that out just so you can see exactly what is the axis of evil. That is the fact that the cosmic microwave background, which they say is the energy being emitted from the furnace, which is the sea, which is of course putting us in the center again. They found that it lines up with the Earth. Well, wait a second. We're just a random speck in the middle of everything. How could the outer edges of the universe line up with the Earth? Doesn't make any sense. So let's read about that. We got astrophysicist Ashok Singhal. Quote, the apparent alignment in the cosmic microwave background in one particular direction through space is called evil because it undermines our ideas about the standard cosmological model. The Copernican principle seems to be in jeopardy. End quote. Very, very important. Let's go to the next one. Astrophysicist Dragan Hutterer. Quote, why is the solar system cosmically aligned? Nobody can explain. End quote. Nobody can explain that one. Let's go with the next one. This is from the following source here, if you want to type that in so you want to see where I got it from. Let's see here. Quote, we found something very bizarre. There is some extra, so far unexplained structure in the cosmic microwave background. We had expected that the microwave background would be truly isotropic, with no preferred direction in space, but that may not be the case. The octopole and quadrupole components are arranged in a straight line across the sky, along a kind of cosmic equator. That's weird. We don't think this is due to the foreground contamination, Dr. Tenmark said. It could be telling us something about the shape of the space on the largest scales. We did not expect this. We cannot yet explain it. End quote. Yeah, they didn't expect it. It goes against the Copernican principle. They observe it, so now they're busy right now. If you go in the office of Max Tenmark, they're busy trying to figure out a way that they can now explain away why the cosmic microwave background is aligned to the Earth. Because again, it places the Earth at the prime importance, centrality, and it's of the most importance. You got this quote here, and you can, again, click this link, or not click it, but you don't have to type it in. If the universe does contain such an axis, it would contradict our current views of the cosmos, which assumes that matter and energy are uniformly distributed throughout, and that the universe looks pretty much the same in all directions. A similar bias among structures of cosmic proportion would have deep implications. For example, if more galaxies are spinning one way than the other, this implies that the universe has a net spin or angular momentum in a particular direction. Since angular momentum can neither be created or destroyed, the universe must have come into existence in a spin. Well, what set it spinning, though? And what is it spinning relative to? End quote. This is Y. Tomozawa. Quote, in the Friedman universe, one possible interpretation of the coordinates is that the whole space is on the surface of an expanding balloon and has no center. But in such a universe, there is no cosmic microwave background dipole, even in the presence of a peculiar velocity. In other words, the observation of a cosmic microwave background dipole excludes such an interpretation of the coordinates of the Friedman universe. End quote. Extremely important. Again, is there a violation of the Copernican principle in radio sky? Again, this is Ashok Segal. Quote, there is no denying that from the large anisotropes present in the radio sky, independently seen both in the discrete source distribution and in the diffuse cosmic microwave background, the Copernican principle, again, seems to be in jeopardy. Quote, end quote. This is Joseph Silk, University of California. Quote, studies of the cosmic background radiation have confirmed the isotropy of the radiation or its complete uniformity in all directions. If the universe possesses a center, we must be very close to it. Otherwise, excessive observable anisotropy in the radiation intensity would be produced, and we would detect more radiation from one direction than from the opposite direction. End quote. Again, I put that one in there for the importance of telling you if the universe possesses a center, then we must be very close to it. Okay? Which is against everything that the Copernican model said. Go back and listen to me talk about the Copernican model again. How about physicist Lawrence Krauss? Everybody knows him. When he's not busy with these women that he shouldn't, maybe he's got more quotes like this. Let's see. Quote, but when you look at the CMB map, you also see that the structure that is observed is in fact, in a weird way, correlated with the plane of the Earth around the Sun. Is this Copernicus coming back to haunt us? That's crazy. We're looking at the whole universe. That would say you're truly at the center of the universe. End quote. Lawrence Krauss, that's from the movie Principle. You can watch him say it for yourself if you go check out that movie. This is from Rick Delano, who's the co-producer of the Principle, which is one of the quotes that I found of his. He says, remember to tilt the ecliptic 23.5 degrees. The Earth is not tilted in the geocentric model. The cosmos is, interestingly enough, it is tilted exactly on the angle built into the CMB, the largest visible structure in the cosmos. Please try and understand, there is one and only one cosmological model that would have predicted a cosmological significance to this 23.5 angle of the ecliptic. It is the geocentric model. In the heliocentric model, this 23.5 degree angle is ascribed to a tilt in the Earth's axis. In other words, it is a purely local phenomenon, not expected to have any cosmological significance at all. In this specific observation, it is the geocentric model which proves to have a better predictive fit to large-scale cosmological observations. This will help you understand why this astonishing alignment with the ecliptic and the equinoxes of the Earth is described as the axis of evil. Evil why? Evil because there should be no possible reason to expect an alignment of the universe's largest structure with supposedly the insignificant Earth, or if you prefer, supposedly insignificant local solar system. Unless, of course, you are already a geocentrist, in which case the alignment is very interesting confirmation that this angle is not merely local, but is cosmological in significance, end quote. Rick Delano. Alright, so that's on the axis of evil. We're moving quite along. I don't think there's very many more quotes left. But now we're going to talk about dark energy and dark matter. There's only 3 quotes here. Let's get to those. This is from a report of the Dark Energy Task Force in 2006. You can type in this if you want to find that quote particularly. Quote, dark energy appears to be the dominant component of the physical universe, yet there is no persuasive theoretical explanation for its existence or magnitude. The acceleration of the universe is, along with dark matter, the observed phenomenon that most directly demonstrates that our theories of fundamental particles and gravity are either incorrect or incomplete. Most experts believe that nothing short of a revolution in our understanding of fundamental physics will be required to achieve a full understanding of the cosmic acceleration. For these reasons, the nature of dark energy ranks among the very most compelling of all outstanding problems in physical science. These circumstances demand an ambitious, observable program to determine the dark energy properties as well as possible, end quote. And so much is said in that quote that basically everything that they believe is wrong. Go back and listen to Michio Kaku tell you how far off they are, and then this guy is telling you right now that the acceleration of the universe, along with dark most directly demonstrates that the theories of fundamental particles and gravity are either incorrect or complete. Again, as I've told you many times, you can't really get gravity is what makes the Earth a sphere. I'm not going to go into that, even though it doesn't match observations. Gravity works maybe in the solar system if you're talking Newtonian, but outside that it all falls apart. But yet they keep it, and they put in dark energy and dark matter to fix the issues. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the very definition of pseudoscience. That's exactly it. There's no other thing you can hear. Alright, let's read this. I can't read this guy's name, but we'll just read the quote. Quote, we now have increasing direct evidence that dark matter does not exist in galaxies. Then it is unlikely that dark matter is hidden somewhere else in the universe. Therefore, the widely accepted cosmic microwave background cosmology is in difficulty. For this reason, it is worthwhile to reconsider the expansion of the universe by starting from scratch. Our result has the merit that it does not contain hypothetical stuff. I mean, what do you think about that? I don't know what to tell you. It's just telling you that everything that they believe is in difficulty, and it's time to reconsider the expansion of the universe by starting from scratch. But you don't understand, it's fact. The universe is expanding, that's a fact. That's what's being taught in school. It's being taught to your children. It's being proposed as scientific pseudoscience. Let's go to the next one. This is by Craig J. Cody and a few other people here. Quote, according to the standard concordance model of cosmology, over 95% of the energy content of the universe is extraordinary dark matter or dark energy, whose existence has been inferred from the failure of the standard model of particle physics plus general relativity to describe the behavior of the astrophysical systems larger than a stellar cluster, while the very homogeneity and isotropy and inhomogeneity of the universe owe to the influence of an inflation field whose particle physics identify as completely mysterious even after 3 decades of theorizing. Testing the cosmological principle should be one of the key goals of modern observational cosmology. Sorry, I buffed that one up a little bit, but the important part here is the end one again, that we're all wrong. They're all wrong. Okay, they admit it. But they have to hold on to it so dearly because it's their worldview. All these things are explaining. Again, all this talk about dark matter, 95% of the world. Remember what I read earlier? Go back and look again at all the quotes that said that dark matter is not needed if the Earth is central. So the only reason they need it is because, everything's expanding, we're flying away too fast. We need it to expand because we're on a balloon. We're on a balloon because we can't be in the center. Who's blowing it up? We don't really know. And why do we don't see spatial curvature? Well, I don't know. It's just nonsense. Just nonsense. All right, let's move on to Newtonian physics. I think I just have a few. I think I call them Newtonian physics, but really they're just Newton's quotes, I believe, but I could be wrong. Let me close up some of these boxes because they're getting a little annoying. Up here. If you guys don't use OneNote, man, if you're a researcher